Screen for the open now. Oh, Amanda studied fitness. Okay, ignore this. Yeah. Actually, Amanda, bear with us a moment. Thank you for bearing with us, everyone. Yeah. We have Amanda Ingmeyer and Elaine Blatt who will be presenting on behalf of DQ. Thank you all for bearing with our technical difficulties.
Thank you. Can you all hear me in the room?
Yes. Yes.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having Elaine and I today. And sorry we could not be there in person with all of you. So I will kick us off and introduce myself. And then when I hand it over to Elaine later, have her introduce herself as well. So I'm Amanda Ingmeyer. I am in DEQ headquarters for the Materials Management Program, and I co-lead our Built Environment Program, which is nestled within Materials Management. So we're fully focused on the materials in our built environment. I've been at DEQ about 4.5 years. Before that, I was working in the industry as an architect. So I'm excited now to be on the public side working on these issues. So just to kind of kick it off here with our presentation, Elaine and I are here to share the 2050 vision, which is Oregon's statewide materials management plan. You heard a little bit about that. So we'll talk about kind of the shift that we had from focusing on solid waste management to moving towards this more life cycle approach of sustainable materials management that we've been talking about this morning. We'll also then talk about 2 of the highest priority focus areas for DEQ's materials management program, which are food and built environment. And we'll talk a little bit more along the way as why those have become focus areas. So in 2012, the Environmental Quality Commission, which for anyone who's not familiar is the body that governs DEQ, the EQC adopted the 2050 vision and framework for action for materials management in Oregon. This vision, it shifted our approach from solid waste management, which on this chart is kind of the area that's highlighted in blue, to a sustainable materials management approach, which looks at more of the life cycle, bringing our focus beyond solely end of life to include all of the stages that you see here, from extraction to manufacturing, distribution, and use. So why did we do this? I think a lot of you probably know the answers to some of this, but in our data, one of the reasons was most emissions occur upstream. So when we look at our greenhouse gas emissions as a state, almost all of the emissions occur upstream, with only 1% occurring at the end of life. Additionally, as we look at our statewide consumption-based greenhouse gas emissions, we also started to look at, okay, what's the potential reduction if we're looking at recycling as a strategy? And estimates from DEQ's waste impact calculator found that it's about 3% on its own. And so while we understand the recycling is important, it alone is insufficient. So this again helped us understand this need to move towards a full life cycle approach. Okay, there we go. So now that we've gotten to the stage, we know we need to focus on the full life cycle. We know we need to look upstream, and we have the 2050s vision. So how did we start to identify our priority areas? So this might be familiar to folks already, but just for anyone who it's not, Oregon maintains two emissions inventories, the sector-based and the consumption-based. So the circle you see on the left side of the screen here, the orange and green, that is our sector-based emissions as a state. And that is essentially everything that occurs inside of the state boundaries, with an exception for imported energy. The consumption-based inventory, that's what occurs on the right side of the screen, the blue and the green circles. That is everything, all the emissions that occur because of the consumption that we have as a state. So everything that we use from furniture to food to building materials to the clothes we wear, that accounts for all of those, even if they weren't produced in the state. So you can see there's this part of the Part where these two emissions inventories overlap. And there's also the parts where they represent different things. And so to understand the full impacts of our emissions as a state, it's really important that we're looking at both of these inventories. And in particular, the consumption-based emissions inventory, that is the one that we maintain as the materials management program. So as we look at these inventories over time, what you can see is the green line, kind of that lower, more jagged line. Those are our sector-based emissions over time. And you can see the areas where we've started to decrease those. And right now they're a little bit flattened out. But over time, in general, those have gone down starting in, the late 1999, 2000 timeframe. And what this speaks to is a lot of the focus as a state has been on efficiency, whether that's building efficiency, vehicle efficiency. And so you can see that those policies have started to work. What we also see is the blue part of the diagram that goes up. Those are consumption-based emissions. And so what we see is those have continued to rise over time. And so while efficiency is important, similar to how recycling is important, neither one on their own are sufficient because we have this other issue of increased consumption over time, to the point where we now have a 6 times gap between those emissions inventories compared to what we had in 1990. And neither is at where the dotted orange line is, which was our sector-based target that's 10% below 1990. So when we look at the major categories of the CBEI, which is the consumption-based emissions inventory, there are two that really stand out as significant areas of focus. So we have food. This makes up 15.3% of our consumption-based emissions as a state. We also have the built environment. It's not as clear-cut where those emissions occur. Obviously, they occur in the construction component here, this category, but they show up in some of the other areas as well. And so adding all of that together, kind of on the back end, getting into those meta categories, built environment accounts for 14.4% of our consumption-based emissions as a state. And so these are two of the really high impact areas that we've started to focus on as a materials management program. I also just want to point out that we see the vehicles and parts is at the top here, but a lot of those emissions, as you look at the colors of these bars, are in the use phase. Those are things being addressed through other policies focused on, vehicle emission standards, things like that. And so that's why these other ones show up more in the space of materials management, where you see a lot of the emissions are in this pre-purchase area. In addition to greenhouse gas emissions, there's also several other significant factors associated with food and the built environment that have led to us prioritizing these work areas. So I'll highlight just a few here, and then Elaine and I will share more detail about these work areas. So on the food side, 25 to 40% of all food in the US is never eaten. And what that looks like is in this wasting of food. It represents a huge waste of limited resources. So in land, if all that wasted food were grown on one farm, it would occupy an area 3/4 the size of California. In water, it would include all the water from Texas, California, and Ohio combined. And this doesn't even include the energy that goes into the equipment, the fertilizer production and use, and the pesticides. Um, then, as we also, again, just kind of touching on GHG emissions, if we think about the GHG impacts of food, we often think about the emissions generated in landfills, which you can see here on the left. It is significant, but we can eliminate them and even gain some benefit back through anaerobic digestion and composting. However, if we look at the far right side, we can see the massive GHG reduction potential if we prevent that waste in the first place, something in the range of 6 to 7 times greater. Also, food waste represents 2% of all US energy use, which is enough to power 54 million homes. And it's a huge GDP expense. So the annual total cost of food wasted in the US is worth 1 year of Oregon's GDP. On the built environment side, as we look at this life cycle, we saw some of this earlier in some of the charts too, but when we look at just building materials, what we see is most of the significant production of GHGs in the building material life cycle is in the production, about 91%. 8%, another 8% in construction, and then at end of life, there's very little opportunity to impact the GHGs there. When we start talking about the reuse of those materials in order to prevent some of the virgin materials at the start, that's where we start to really see that benefit. And we'll hear more about that later today as well. Also, it's estimated that we will double the global building stock by 2060. So this equals the addition of 2.5 trillion square feet, or one New York City every 34 days between now and 2060. And this is obviously from a global standpoint, but we know we're in a similar boat in Oregon when we look at all of the housing needs we have, and just think about the new construction that's on the horizon. The built environment is also rife with chemicals and toxics that are used in our building materials and or in the production of them. So less than 2.3% of chemicals are actually monitored, tested, or regulated through EPA's Toxic Substance Control Act. So how do we start to think about what's in these materials that we're using? And then the building and construction materials sector is one of the highest at risk for forced labor in the supply chain. So global figures on the screen here, 28 million people are held in forced labor servitude, and 160 million children are subject to child labor. When we took these numbers and kind of looked at what is Oregon's quote unquote share of this impact, and these are just estimations because the supply chain is so opaque, we estimated around 14,000 people held in forced labor servitude and 80,000 children subject to child labor, in just embedded in the use of the materials we use here in Oregon for our built environment. So these are all of the reasons why these two areas have become a huge focus. Not only is there the huge emissions reduction potential, but there's all of these other impacts associated with health, with equity, with human rights. And so wanting to make sure that we're really understanding these kind of holistic impacts for these different focus areas. So now that we've covered the why, we'll jump to the opportunities. I'll kick us off here with built environment and then hand it over to Elaine. So here I'm going to cover some of our previous high impact work in DEQ's built environment program. I'll talk about some outcomes from our analysis of the latest consumption-based emissions inventory, which has helped us identify some areas of high emissions reduction potential. And then also the work that we're doing now, and how that's focused on those greatest opportunities. So previous high impact projects, our program really started its work in small housing. So in 2010, we published a report that showed that one of the top ways to address the greenhouse gas emissions associated with housing was to build smaller. So it estimated a 20 to 40% emissions reduction potential going from kind of an average sized home to a smaller home. And this is achieved through not only less material, but it's also more operationally efficient. And on top of that, there's less space to store all the things we buy. If you think back to that consumption-based chart where the consumption-based line keeps going up. So that's one of the areas we spent a lot of time focusing on through partnerships with Metro, home builders, and others in order to kind of boost this small housing area. We also have spent a lot of time working on concrete. So concrete is the second most used substance in the world, only behind water. It's accountable for about 8% of global emissions. And so all of that made it really an obvious choice to focus on. And our work has included things like working with the Oregon Concrete and Aggregate Producers Association to assist our regional concrete producers in developing environmental product declarations. These are essentially the nutrition label for building materials. It tells us kind of what is the climate-based impact, but also some of the other impacts associated with those products. Through that program, we were able to produce over 1,500 EPDs with our local concrete producers. We also supported the city of Portland to develop their low carbon concrete thresholds, as well as to do some case studies. So with the city of Portland, did one on sidewalks and using low carbon concrete. And then we also partnered with a design build firm to look at low carbon concrete in single family residential. Then we also worked on deconstruction. We provided some grant funding and technical assistance to the city of Portland to support their deconstruction work. And I won't talk about that anymore since I know we're going to have Lauren talking about that later this afternoon. So just another area of high impact I wanted to mention here. So this is starting to look at the analysis I mentioned as it related to the update to the state's consumption-based emissions inventory that we completed this year. Our consultant, Stockholm Environment Institute, conducted this analysis of key areas where there's opportunities for reductions. So everything you see in gray, those are existing policies that are already on the books that lead to reductions in our consumption-based emissions as a state. So those are the things that are going to fall in that kind of middle part of that partie I showed earlier, where it may have occurred because of our sector-based emissions inventory and reductions available there, but it also has an impact here. What is shown in the blue, those are the new opportunities that we explored, things where we don't currently have policies or programs on the books. And so what was identified as kind of the highest impact opportunities, one that's kind of built environment, but also across a lot of other sectors as well, is expanded smart growth. So just looking at how we're building our towns and cities. DLCD is already doing work in this space, but what are some opportunities to kind of expand that work? And then when we talk about built environment specifically, we are looking at things like enhanced building utilization, which is reusing existing buildings or finding opportunities to have folks share a lease where they don't necessarily need all of that space to themselves. So strategies like that. Another one is space efficient housing. So going back to our research in small housing and understanding, are there opportunities to build on that work even further? And then we also have reducing embodied carbon of building materials. And that embodied carbon is that GHG emissions associated with the production of those materials. And that actually was the number one wedge, as we call it, for opportunity that we found in this study. So what these also look like, that I just want to highlight because folks were talking about it earlier, and I think it's super important here, is when we talk about first looking at, do you even need the thing we're building? And if we decide we do, which, you know, in the case of housing, we understand we definitely need more housing. The first opportunity is to look at enhanced building utilization. Is there something existing we can use where we don't have to build something new? If there isn't, then we kind of look at, well, how big does it really need to be? Can we reduce the size of that thing? That's where the smaller home size works, but that applies really to any built thing. And then from there, once we've looked at those opportunities, whatever new construction materials we have on the site, what are the opportunities to reduce those emissions? And that can be in the new materials, and understanding the opportunities for lower global warming potential materials is what we call them, or lower carbon materials. Um, but that can also mean the reuse of materials, which I think again links back to that deconstruction component that you'll hear more about later. So just briefly here now, I'm going to touch on some of our current projects that highlight how we're focusing on these highest impact opportunities. So Oregon was recently awarded $197 million from the EPA through their climate pollution reduction grant. What I've highlighted here, the 25.6 million, that is for building reuse and space efficient housing. So this is focusing on all three of those strategies that we were just talking about on the other slide. Opportunities to reuse existing buildings and convert them to housing, opportunities to build smaller housing or more space efficient housing. And then in addition, we also have a 10% embodied carbon reduction requirement for any new materials that are used on these projects. So we also want to highlight through this work a focus on equity. So to implement this measure, DEQ has partnered with 9 local governments around the state to incentivize the development of 940 new lower embodied carbon housing units, which allows us to address the housing crisis while also working on the climate crisis. So for us, it was important to work with communities all over the estate, testing different approaches in cities of different sizes, because a strategy in, say, Pendleton that's focused on taking the second stories above their downtown and converting those to housing is different from a strategy in Portland of looking at office to residential, is different than a strategy of Tillamook County looking at ADUs. So really wanted to kind of understand the different needs in these different communities and test a bunch of these different ideas. So in addition, all of these units will either be affordable or workforce housing, which is either affordable is defined as less than 80% of the area median income, and workforce is 120% or less of the area median income. So we're really excited that this project is going to serve as a demonstration and hopefully inform some of our future programs as well. In addition, we received 3.5 million from EPA through their in reducing embodied carbon from construction materials and products grant. It's a very long name. So what we've done with this one is develop a Pacific Northwest EPD partnership. EPDs, again, are the Environmental Product Declarations. Through this, we've partnered with the International Code Council and the Washington Department of Commerce, and we'll support 200 regional manufacturers to develop EPDs for their products, providing technical and financial assistance with a focus on materials that are either carbon intensive or other high priority materials. So concrete, asphalt, steel, structural wood, and emerging products, which might be things like reclaimed wood. And so this builds off our success and experience from the concrete EPD program before, and helps us to kind of spread that opportunity out to more material manufacturers in the region. Thinking beyond kind of the pilot projects, research, and voluntary programs, which is largely the work we've been doing for the past 15 years, we're also looking at policy and code-based options. So one example is looking at building codes. So in 2023, the Oregon legislature directed Building Codes Division in consultation with DEQ to study opportunities for reducing embodied carbon emissions in statewide building code. It also had the opportunity to study options for reducing embodied carbon through other means. So we are in the midst of this project right now. This report is due to the legislature at the end of the year. So by December 31st, we will have this report published. And then last thing I'll touch on here is this holistic life cycle of materials. So better understanding all the impacts that are happening throughout the material supply chain. And so we have a research project underway that is looking at mapping the flows and impacts of 8 high priority building materials. So through this project, we'll map the supply chain and identify impacts in the places across that supply chain. We also, again, are looking at these holistic impacts. We want to understand climate and health and ecological and social impacts that are happening. We also expect this project will help inform future areas of focus as well. And this project is also in early stages and expected to be completed by the end of 2025. So we're excited for what this will help uncover for the program. And with that, I will turn it over to Elaine.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm gonna now see if I can successfully share my presentation. I've been a little presentation challenged of late. There we go. Let's see if that works. Okay. Are you all seeing my presentation?
Yes.
And are you now seeing it in slideshow mode?
Yes.
Awesome. That it worked. I'm always so pleased. So I'm going to continue our conversation with discussing how DEQ is thinking about food and food systems going forward, building on a little bit of what Amanda already told you about food impacts and why we're so interested in them, and give you a little flavor of the kinds of the questions that we're talking about in DEQ about food and food systems. You've already seen some of these data, so I won't spend a lot of time here. Amanda showed you the 25 to 40% figure. The one that people seem to be settling on now is 35, and that's bad enough. That's a third of all the food that we grow or import into our country for human consumption that's literally not eaten. And I won't spend time on this slide, but it's another way to look at the impacts that are used to grow that wasted food. And what I will highlight is questions of land use, water use, and fertilizer, because we'll be talking a bit more about those in the context of the food systems work that we're doing. And I'm happy to share these slides so that you all can have these data going forward. This is a slide that is similar to the one Amanda showed you, except that it's inverted. And I just wanted to reiterate again the importance of food in our state as a contributor to greenhouse gas emissions via consumption. And I'm going to be talking a lot more about this in just a few minutes. That dark blue line that shows us that the vast majority of food impacts are in the production phase, because Oregon, even though we are a massive producer of food and food products, Oregon is also for the most part, an importer of food that Oregonians consume. So our wheat and soybeans and all this other stuff are exported for the most part to other places. But just keep this production line in mind. I'm going to be coming back to it in a minute. Because of that impact of the production phase of food, EPA established prevention as a priority, and Oregon ascribes to this scale, which places the primary emphasis of our state policy on preventing the wasting of food in the first place, because that is the primary way that we can reduce those production impacts. Food as a material has the unique quality that, unlike some of the construction materials Amanda talked about, we can't stop producing food. We have to keep producing it. But we can produce it better, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. But it behooves us to not waste it once produced, given how high impact it is, and we're going to talk a bit more about that. I'll also add that a high priority for the state of Oregon is the next piece down this scale, which is donating food to food insecure populations and upcycling food to other valuable uses. But now I want to get into what's really the heart of DEQ's thinking about food going forward. We have spent the last, 2 decades probably, laser focused on prevention. and implementing programs like campaigns to help consumers reduce their wasted food, working with commercial food service operations to reduce food waste in their kitchens and to encourage them to have menus that are also lower waste, and implementing other techniques like smaller plates and so forth to reduce food waste in commercial food service. But as we thought about all of that activity that was really laser focused on sustainable consumption of food, and that's at the bottom of this diagram, which you'll see, which we'll talk more about in a moment, we started to ask ourselves whether or not there would be a value to us to better understand all of these parts as we thought about ways that we could more effectively address food and food waste and food impacts going forward. And so we took a little bit of time to engage in something that we call the Food Systems Mapping Project. I will add the caveat here that this was by no means a rigorous and totally complete effort that would take years to do. But what we did do was talk with a lot of people in various parts of the food system around our state. And as a result of those conversations and some additional study, we landed on this diagram, which I will call DEQ's view of food systems in the state of Oregon, because it does leave out some important pieces that are not really part of DEQ's purview. And the pieces that we have become very interested in and their interaction are food waste production. So that would include both the production of food on farm, but also the processing and manufacture of food. I will also share the caveat that DEQ is not responsible for on-farm impacts. Those are the responsibility of the Oregon Department of Agriculture. But we have, and I'll discuss these two in greater detail, we have opportunities as DEQ to have positive impacts on how food is produced. The supporting sustainable consumption piece of this diagram really is the heart and soul of what DEQ has done to date, and includes our existing and ongoing prevention work, but for us also includes a greater interest in finding ways that we can use our surplus food to feed people who are food insecure, and also in other ways increase food access. And I'll also be talking in a few minutes about the notion of plant-rich diets and how that could have a positive impact on our state. And then finally, that place that DEQ is very involved with, which is waste management. I'm guessing that you heard earlier that whole 2020 vision and framework for action is really Oregon's solid waste management plan now. So we do care about what happens to food at its end of life. This rather complicated diagram includes a bunch of arrows that show the different ways that we think that pieces of the food system interact with each other, and that's where I'm going next. Because that's really what's driving how we think about our food policy going forward in DEQ. Returning to this diagram, because I think you can't return to it too much, just to reiterate the role that production plays in the impacts of food. And so, as I mentioned, we've been laser focused on the reduction of food waste as a means of reducing those production impacts by simply reducing our need to produce that much food in the first place. But we've also, our food systems work has caused us to do a lot more thinking about ways that we could impact how food is produced to make it lower impact, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then also just doing a better job of reducing our wasting as we go forward. So for us, this is going to continue to be a really important piece of data, and prevention is not going away. Even though I'm going to talk about other things now, prevention is not going away for us as a priority. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, because this is actually, a place where people simply naturally go when they think about our excess food, and that's that we ought to be feeding hungry people with it, food insecure people, and that is clearly true. And so what we really want to do, and DEQ is focused on this, is continue to support the rescue of nutritionally and culturally appropriate food for food insecure populations. We also want to do this in a way that does not burden our food donation agencies with food that's either inappropriate or which is not fit to be eaten. And so we don't want our food donation agencies to become pathways to disposal, and that does sometimes occur, and we're going to talk more a bit about that in just a couple of minutes. And then finally, we want to support the rescue of food in a way that reduces food loss along that chain. And what we have seen in food donation programs is that there are aspects of collecting food for donation that contribute to its loss. So rescuing food and not being able to get it to food donation agencies quickly enough. Food donation agencies that don't have ways to store food properly before they're able to distribute it to food insecure populations and that sort of thing. So these are the kinds of things we think about in DEQ when we think about the best ways that we can support the feeding of food insecure people with our surplus food. But what I wanted to point out to all of you, so you can think about this as well, is that rescue, as important as that is insufficient to address our food waste, our excess food. And this is a diagram that's based on data from US EPA. And the upper part of this slide shows as a loaf of bread all of the food that's available to Americans, and then shows you in the blue shaded portion the portion that we consume, and then that 35% on the right that we don't consume. If you look at the amount of food that we don't consume in our country and you ask the question, how much of that do we need to feed food insecure populations, you arrive at the two slices depicted in the lower corner of this slide. That is enough. That is enough of our food surplus to feed all food insecure Americans. And what that leaves us with is still a remaining food waste chunk that's pretty big. So a couple of things that this tells us for our policies going forward. One, when we want to support food donation and feeding food insecure Americans, we have room to be picky. And we should have policies in place that ensure that the food that we collect and redistribute is, in fact, nutrient dense, culturally appropriate, and gets to people in a state that's fit to be eaten, because we have more than enough. But the second thing that this tells us is that in addition to supporting food rescue, we really do need to continue to support the notion of reducing food waste in the first instance, because we still have this very significant amount of surplus that is literally not needed by people in our country to eat. So moving forward, because I know we're running out of time, another important emphasis for us going forward is that when we look at food at the end of its life, that we recover it. We recover unavoidable food waste. Again, emphasis on that, trying to reduce food waste in the first instance. That we recover unavoidable food waste for its best and highest use. And for us, when we think about that, that is trying to put food back into agricultural production. What you see on this slide is a picture of an actual composting facility in the state of Oregon at the top. And what we would most like to see happen with food waste is that it be recovered and used to produce more food. And to produce it in ways that are lower impact. And this is where we get to the notion in our food system that we could produce food more with lower impact if we use, say, compost, for example, that not only is a great way to sequester soil carbon in the soil, but is also a great way to reduce the need for agricultural production to use chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and also to reduce water use. So what we see is this opportunity for us as a state to have an impact on food production in ways that have generally been seen as just agricultural issues by focusing policy that helps us recover this material to its highest and best use. Amanda mentioned the CPRG grants, of which a substantial portion are going to built environment, and you will have seen on her diagram that another fairly significant chunk is coming to us for some significant food waste infrastructure programs. We have almost $29 million, the bulk of which we are allocating to grants to composting and AD facilities around the state to increase their capacity to take organic material. And we think that that's probably our most efficient and effective way of increasing our ability to take food waste and recover it for its valuable constituents. And then the remaining piece, a piece that I'm personally very excited about, is a carve out of about $2 million to specifically support the development of highly localized composting that supports community gardens and highly localized what we call urban farming, that is targeted at helping food insecure populations get better access to fresh food on a more regular basis. Those again, sort of part of the whole notion of what we like to think of as true circularity in the food system is reducing our food waste and then taking the unavoidable waste and putting it back into its highest and best use. A side benefit to this is also that when you reduce chemical fertilizers and pesticides, for example, you can reduce impacts on farm workers. And so we're very interested in the ways that our work with food can actually improve health impacts on farm workers. I'm going to wrap this up quickly because I now know we've run over time. Sorry, Sean. We have come to appreciate that what we eat matters also. And so the work that the Stockholm Environmental Institute did and that Amanda cited also helped us see the potential for greater emphasis on encouraging Oregonians to eat lower impact foods. The climate activist Paul Hawken has a list of the highest impact activities that we can engage in to reduce our greenhouse gas impacts. And on his list, preventing the wasting of food is number 1, but eating a more plant-rich diet is number 2. So it's becoming an important aspect of our policy going forward to think about how we can encourage Oregonians or people living in Oregon to eat a more plant-rich diet. And as I mentioned, and then we're also interested, again, on this notion of production, of how we can support efforts to lower the impact of higher impact foods. And there are a lot of production techniques that can help lower those impacts. And I'll just wrap up this bit by saying you don't have to be a vegetarian. The impacts of high impact foods are so high that simply reducing your consumption of meat and dairy will provide a significant improvement to greenhouse gas impacts through food consumption. And I'm going to wrap it up, and I'm hoping I haven't gone too far over. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Amanda. That was fantastic. I think what's really important to think about is, talking about the built environment, shelter and food are 2 very basic human needs, and how it's connected to this work is so important. So I really appreciate all that great information that they shared. At the end, I have a QR code and a web link to share with you all that Sean will be uploading all of these presentations. So feel free to keep taking photos of the slides, but don't feel like you have to, because we will provide all of this stuff to you. Or you can also memorize it all. Let's take a really quick break. We've been talking at you all for a while, and we're about to give you a lot more good data. So, even if you don't have to use the restroom, just quickly stand up, and then I'll bring us back together in just a couple moments, get some fresh tea or water. How would you drive? Yeah. I was saying, on his life, about not wanting rescue organizations to be able to. Oh my gosh. I was like down. I'm trying to talk, trying to get people to realize that from his material.
Yeah, I wrote the same thing. I was saying, I'm inspired by my yes. About that.
I know. Not just the Vic, but
Going to Costa Rica.
We have like history, you know. Because I feel like it should be coming from all around. So yeah, that's getting my guy.
Well,
Came up with insights into work.
Seriously, I mean,
I'd be curious if you mind if we get into like questions, if I can reach out to advice or thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I know, and we've done some of this problem numbers on. Generate bacterial concentrations. And then we try to look at their performance targets. How many?
thanks. Same page here.
I know, that's why I was like.
Yeah, there's your big concern.
Some of the hobbies start to come back.
whole, like a.
Oh, it didn't work. Back and get ready for our next round.
I'll get your contact information. Great.
Please do, thank you. Bye.
Thank you for being here. We've had a few times. Very still, but from Portland. And moderated to. Glad you're here. Yeah, I'm very excited. All right, welcome back, everyone. Yes, all right. So before lunch, we are going to have Joel and Bryce from Resource Recycling Systems. And they're going to really, help us like frame out some more of these perspectives, especially as we're talking about regional sustainable materials management solutions. So I think Joel's gonna give us kind of like a high level perspective, and then he's gonna tag team with Bryce, who's gonna then come and really get into the data and the numbers. So without further ado, I'm gonna hand things off to Joel.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. Thanks for coming. Thanks, Benton County, for getting this project moving. RRS is really excited to be part of this. It's a really, really exciting project, I think, for a group of counties to come together and approach this problem. So we've heard this morning some big picture thinking about sustainable materials management, some big picture thinking about the history of Benton County's specific challenge. And what I want to do in the next few minutes is just start to frame up kind of some more level setting about what are the elements of the system and what are the ways to start getting you thinking about what this group can do, right? Because it's an interesting group. What one county could do, what multiple counties could do is different than what a city could do or what a state could do, and what's really sort of within our realm of control. And this will also help set us up to do more work. So as Liz set out, this is a longer range project, and we want to as part of this project, there'll be an opportunity for us to hear from you and sort of hone how we can contribute to the meetings down the road and set you up with the technical information or the analysis that can help you make some decisions. And so I'm going to do a little bit of that framing, and then Bryce is going to get into a little bit more details on some of the flow. First, I just want to talk about some sort of core pieces of the system. Again, for most of you, this will be sort of second nature for a lot of people in this room. But people here are coming from different directions. So we just want to take a look at what is the materials management system, how might we evaluate it, and then I'll get into some policy pieces. And as I said, Bryce will take a look more deeply at the data and infrastructure. What is the system? And where do we impact it? So big picture, and starting to think about sort of framing these things out. What can we impact? Right? There's global markets, national markets, national policy. Those are mostly out of the realm, right? We're not going to change capitalism from inside this room. We're not going to change like national consumer behavior. Consumerism and culture is going to continue to exist. Similarly, right, those markets generate, those are the primary generators of waste and what's in our waste stream. So what are the elements that we can influence, right? We have a lot of influence in policy. We can do education awareness. We have a lot of influence on the collection system, the sorting system, the recovery system. So of the elements in the system, there are points where a group like this can have more influence, and there's points where we can have less influence. And I just want to have that in your minds as we think about, or later today, we're going to get some case studies. I think also thinking about, DEQ's work, looking at some of those key areas where we could have the biggest impact. If we were going to do food or construction, what could a county or a group of counties do to impact that food material stream? Similar, right, way of thinking about this, high impact, high influence, right? Like that's the sweet spot where we want to be. What falls into that is the work that we can help you do over the next few months. And we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna get some really good examples of that today. We've already had a couple. And we can start thinking more and more about what could go into that category and really thinking about how to frame that out for your action. I think of things like, the examples we're going to give this afternoon after lunch are, I think, fit right in that high impact, high influence category. On the other side of the spectrum, there are really good examples of education and outreach, and there's people who do it great, but it has limited, right? It's expensive, and you're not going to probably like really reduce generation dramatically, right? In the ways that we really need to talk about. I don't want to take it up to scale. I know there's great, and I actually have a communications background. I care about communication, so I don't want to, but right, that's hard to have a really big impact. And then there's, the in-between things. There's a lot of things that fit into those categories. And there's things that done well can be moved around on the scale. And those are things we want to continue thinking about. And then really thinking about where things land on that scale is also, what do you consider impact? I'm missing the top one away. Top one is economic. But these are, this is the triple bottom line evaluation of what your impacts can be. And at the end of the day, a lot of these decisions will be representative of the group's values. But we can also measure a lot of these things, right? What is the opportunity? What is the high impact, high local control option that has the most job creation? Or has the best outcomes for environmental justice communities, or right, has the biggest impact on reducing emissions. So those are the kinds of questions that I want to frame up for you to be thinking about as we start to get into the exercise this afternoon and thinking about the actual This gets into the actual generation, like what's in our waste stream and where it's going. Keep these things top of mind. So to look a little bit more at some of the early work that we have started doing. We did a quick survey of the counties and looked at basically what counties are currently doing on the policy front. What are those things that counties have started doing? And this was at the waste shed level. So there's things that cities could be doing that wouldn't be captured here. And this is the counties that are represented in this room. So 82% of the counties in this room have a current solid waste plan. We're not naming names, but 2 counties may not have a solid waste plan, or if they did, we couldn't find it. A little more than half have specific waste reduction goals, right? Getting a little bit farther up the stream. A little less than half actually have reuse goals or have established specific reuse priorities. But only 18% have gone sort of over and above and established some mandate over and above what exists in state law. So the picture here is that there's a lot of good work happening, and there's also a lot of room for counties to be doing more, right? If a collection of counties took all enacted a similar policy on food or C&D or some other thing, right? There's room to have impact. And then state context. So in the realm of what can be done, the state has a role in waste. A lot of what Oregon does as a state is permitting, compliance, regulation, land use bans, but then over and above landfill bans. Over and above landfills, there has been historically a trend towards more and more extended producer responsibility and product stewardship. So bottle bill, very famous, 1971, has pretty big impact. Opportunity to recycle, also leadership for Oregon on waste management and recycling. Updates in the 1990s, and then the beginning of our sort of journey towards more and more product stewardship. E-cycles, paint care, expansion of the bottle bill, DEQ's implementation of the sustainable materials management perspective approach, and then most recently, the Recycling Modernization Act, the Plastic Pollution and Recycling Modernization Act, and product stewardship for mattresses, which is coming soon as well. These are impactful policies, probably really challenging to implement at a county level, or maybe even a level of a collection of counties, right? EPR is managing thousands of manufacturers and producers. That's a pretty big burden, policy burden for a county or even a collection of counties to take on. But I do want to talk a little bit about specifically the Recycling Modernization Act. There's a lot coming. It's going to have some pretty significant impacts, but there's something that I wanted to sort of be clear that I think what it will do and what it likely won't do in terms of near-term waste diversion from the perspective of the county. So as folks likely know, implementation is coming July 1st, 2025. As CAA, Circular Action Alliance, the producer responsibility organization that's implementing the Recycling Modernization Act, has started to say, I think appropriately, it's going to be a dial, not a switch, right? So July 1st, 2025, implementation begins, but that's going to look different at different places in the state. Right? Everything is not going to come online all at once, magically on the morning of July 1st. Over time, things will roll out over the state. Communities in different parts of the state will get new collection carts and new trucks, and they will implement all the pieces of the RMA. Over time, RMA, Recycling Modernization Act, is going to have some really great impacts. Harmonizing the recycling collection list statewide is super important. It has the potential, the really great potential of reducing the contamination in the recycling stream. But that's gonna take time, right? There's gonna be change. A lot of people think there might be more contamination the first year because there's gonna be changes to the list and people are gonna have some uncertainty. RMA is also gonna fund collections, which is great. More communities collecting more material. It's gonna create and monitor responsible end markets. It's gonna generate copious amounts of data for us to better understand the recycling system. And really, I think one of the most important things it's gonna do is it's gonna really sort of prove to what degree our recycling system is doing what it's supposed to be, right? Like that was the question that sort of got raised in 2017 that we were all asking, which was like, why is the system not doing what we thought it was doing? RMA is gonna help answer that question. What it's not gonna do is dramatically decrease the amount of material going to landfills overnight, right? We hope over time that with all of these other things, that it will start to divert more material from the landfill, and that will start to signal to producers to change what's in their packaging, or to lightweight their packaging, or to use less packaging. All of those things have a huge amount of potential in the act, but we might not see those things for 5 years, 10 years. And so we see it again. So great opportunity, but it's gonna need a little time. So I'm gonna take a quick break for questions about this sort of segment before I hand it off to Bryce. But for now, we should probably stay towards the clarification questions, if there's anything about this. Otherwise, I'll hand it off to Bryce and he can talk about data. And then we have another little break for Q&A before lunch. Yeah.
Just one quick clarification question. The previous information about policy, was that as a result of a written policy assessment, or was that policy, or was that outcomes?
This?
Yeah.
Policy.
Okay, thanks.
I had a question
Yeah.
about that. When you looked at those that do have policies, did you compare and contrast where there's overlap and alignment already on those policies?
We have not yet. That's great. It's a great thought.
136 acres.
Okay. Ready, Bryce?
I was gonna take that jump there. You just
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. All right, so, I find this the challenging part of the presentation where I throw a bunch of data and charts at you, and I hope that I don't lose you, daydreaming about our upcoming lunch. So yeah, bear with me here. I think there's some really good data and, so what we're gonna do, here's a list of essentially the things I'm gonna cover today. There's preliminary research that we've done here, looking at materials and solid waste in the region and the infrastructure that we have to manage it. So I'm gonna dig into waste generation, the methods of disposition, the composition of what's being disposed. Gonna look into different aspects of the solid waste management infrastructure. And present some preliminary analysis that we've done on the potential for managing these materials to its highest and best use. I want to emphasize this is really preliminary and we want to use this meeting to get feedback and see, again, where we can kind of take this research a little bit further. And so basically I like to think, when we're looking at materials, we're looking at stuff. So we're gonna have a look at the stuff that we're generating in this region, understand how it's currently being managed, and consider where there might be opportunities to manage this stuff more sustainably. So that's our goal here today. Let's make sure I have the right direction. Yes, okay. So some of these charts may be things that you've seen before. This is DEQ does a great job at gathering waste generation and recycling and recovery data. So what we're gonna start here is a historical view of the waste generation over the last 30 years. And there's kind of 3 things that I wanna point out here that I think are important. First of all, this data set includes municipal solid waste. So that does not include waste from manufacturing and industrial processes. It doesn't actually include reconditioned and reused materials. or waste originating out of state but handled in the state. So what we're looking at here is municipal waste that's generated within the state. The second thing I want to point out is that this region, it represents 75% of the materials that are managed across the state. So that's really significant. So the impact that the folks in this room, that the counties in this task force have, that's 3/4 of what the state is managing overall. So that's a really big influence. Number 3, you can see some spikes and dips. You know, this top line is what's in region, the bottom line is the rest of the state. Following similar trends, but you see, you know, a spike and then a dip in kind of late aughts, and then again, kind of leading up to COVID. And so what this says to me is that, you know, there's the housing crisis of 2008, you see a big dip, starts to rise back up. We have COVID, and then there was extreme wildfire season. And so that's that second little spike there in 2020, 2021. But overall, if you're looking at these trends, you know, waste, material generation at the end of life is increasing over time. And so what this tells me is that when we're thinking about kind of moving upstream, looking at solutions that are preventing waste, you know, reducing waste, we're facing an uphill battle. And that these are going against the trends that we're seeing, no matter how much work we've put into it so far. I always like to look at things per capita. You know, when I look at the total, it's like, okay, well, what's happening? Maybe this is just due to population growth, because there's obviously a clear dynamic there. You see a similar trend here with overall with per capita. You do see that the regional average is a little bit below the state. So there's some behavior, some messaging that seems to be happening in this region that's having some effect. But you see those same spikes, the same overall kind of macroeconomic kind of global trends that are driving this generation of materials. That is kind of the challenge that we're facing here. So I'm going to move on here and talk about, okay, this material that's being generated, what is the disposition of this stuff? And so you see here on the left side, that's what's generated. That's the same data as the line charts we were just looking at. And then we have disposal and recovery within the region and outside of the region. At the very highest level, we see that just over 60% of the statewide generation is disposed and 40% is recovered. So you might see this, you know, recovery rate of 39.4%. That's what we're looking at there. When we look at the regional share of that, again, that's 75% of what's generated in this region, is what we saw before. 70% of what's disposed in the state comes from this region, and 84% of what's recovered in the state comes from this region. So you'll see there that there is a trend of, you know, better performing in terms of recovery rather than disposal in this region versus the rest of the state. So, you know, translating this to the recovery rate, you do see it. It's almost 20% more in this region than outside of the region. You know, this is a theme that's really emerging, that the region does, you know, excel at recovery relative to the rest of the state. And it probably doesn't come as a surprise to most of you. State's population centers are here. There's greater access to services and infrastructure. We're going to look at the infrastructure a little bit more, but you know, there's reasons why this is the case. And it's harder to recover in areas that don't have population density, that don't have this density of infrastructure. I also want to make the note here that this data set considers waste to energy as recovery. As we all probably know, the incinerator locally here in the region has announced its closure. It was brought up earlier today. And so I think it's relevant to look at, okay, what does this recovery look like if we take recovery for energy out of the equation? Because that you know, kind of instantly leaving us pretty soon here. And what that does is that knocks down our recovery rate 5% in the region instantly, if that waste energy is no longer considered recovery or is no longer being recovered there. So I think that's important to look at. You do see that the rest of the state, there is some influence there. So there is material coming from outside of the region that is being put to waste to energy here. So let's look at the recovery. At 11%, I mentioned the energy recovery. What else do we see here? 62% is recycling. So the lion's share of recovery that's happening is recycling, 27% is composting and digestion. And so this is really when we're looking at the state data that we have that's being reported, it's defining recovery in these terms. And this is the point where I start thinking, well, what about reuse? Where does that fit into the equation? We know that it's happening. We talk to folks all the time that are doing this reuse work. But whereas the permanent facilities and there's actually laws, this regulatory framework requires a survey on the recovery of materials from recycling and composting, it doesn't require that for reuse. And so there's kind of this like missing data set here for how much is being reused. And so, you know, it kind of so comes as a source of frustration because we know it's happening. But it's often unseen when we dive into the data, and data is what we need to make decisions. And so I think there's a big gap there that we need to name and identify. And, you know, we really, you know, would be great to have a method of better understanding the extent that the impacts of the great reuse work that's happening in this region. Because, yeah, we want to be able to look at it apples to apples with the other methodologies and be able to make some decisions that way. So that's one thing that's missing. So where does all this recovery take place? This is a map, not expecting y'all to like memorize this and look at it in great detail. I'm gonna go into several of these different elements separately to try to understand this a little bit better. But as you see, you know, the regions highlighted, here's all the different types of facilities, recycling, transfer stations, depots, material recovery, reloads, composting, digesters, and our landfills. You do see in that highlighted region, there's a more density of infrastructure, and that's part of the reason why we're seeing more management. We'll get to a slide where we focus just on disposal. One thing you will notice here is that there's you know, less examples of landfills and disposal streams here in this region than outside of the region. So we'll talk about that. So just we'll put this as a placeholder for now and get back to it. So first I want to just focus in on the recycling processing infrastructure here. So this here is a snapshot of kind of where things are being recycled in the state. This is this infrastructure map on the left is based on the DEQ permit data and some additional information from our SS facility database. We'll keep a database on all recovery facilities, and so we integrated some of that here. So you see here the drop-off sites. So these are depots where source separated materials are aggregated. You have reload facilities where co-mingled materials that are collected in areas that are not close to MRFs, the material recovery facilities. That's where they're dumped, aggregated, and shipped to the MRFs. Then you have the material recovery facilities where mixed recyclables are sorted into commodities. In this list, we did include both single stream MRFs and C&D recovery. So these are examples of anywhere that's sorting materials. You're getting a mix of materials, you're sorting them out into commodities, which then go into markets. What we don't have on this map is the recycling end markets. So this could be something that, you know, in the future we put together as part of this map, but it's not in this data set currently. So a couple of things to focus on here. When we see that regional share of recycling, 80% of the recycling that's happening in the state is of materials generated in this region. So again, the kind of excelling at the recycling side of things. All of the processing, that is the sorting that is taking place in the state, is located in this region. So again, this is where there's been investment in the recovery side of the equation in this region, and that's driving a lot of these trends. And so any material essentially that's being sorted comes through this region, any part of the state. I do want to clarify that that's not to say that there's not recovery that's happening outside of this region. So there's source separation that's happening, OCC, cardboard, scrap metals, that's still happening outside of the region in those different facilities. But the sorting and when we say processing isn't happening. It's all happening here. When we look at food and organics, this is again the permitted compost and anaerobic digestion sites in the region. We see that even more so than recycling, the amount of composting that's happening from waste generated in this region is 87% of what's happening in the state comes from this region. And so that's really significant. On the other hand, when we're looking at just the sheer number of facilities, This region represents 61%. So there's a great, there are a number of composting and digestion facilities outside of the region. But they're smaller in size, and they are managing, less materials because they're in less population dense areas as well. So it's not that it's not happening, but the majority of kind of the food and yard waste that's being composted and digested is taking place at facilities inside this region. Let's go next. And we did talk about reuse and how we don't have the data on how much material is being reused. But Liz Stark did an amazing job pulling a map together of facilities that are managing materials through the through reuse. And so this is certainly not exhaustive. A lot of this is happening at a much smaller scale. These aren't permitted facilities. So there's some clear distinctions here, but I think what this list really does, which is really helpful, is it starts to give an understanding of the type of reuse that's more common and that is increasing in its practice. And so you see here on this map these green what are those pentagons? Food rescue. That's a big one. That's something that came up the DEQ talk. Food rescue is a really significant effort that can have a huge impact. There is some of that. There's quite a bit of that that's already happening. Thrift as well is happening. When we think of textiles, household items, furniture, that's happening through the network of thrift stores and operations. We also see a growing number of tool libraries and building material reuse, and that's one that's trending as well. So both of those, you're kind of seeing these efforts that the state's focusing on food, built environment, that is showing up in the facilities that we're seeing that are managing reuse in that way. So I think these are really important models to build upon. We're going to hear more about them in depth in our case studies that we'll hear about later today. And kind of just to reiterate the point that came up earlier today, the reuse has a more significant life cycle benefit and upstream impact than other recovery options because it is a direct substitute for a new product. And so that 71% of the impact is happening in the resource extraction and manufacturing. If you're reusing something, you're taking that out of the equation. You're replacing the need for that extraction, that manufacturing, which is where that majority of embodied environmental impacts, carbon, originate for a given material. And so that's where reuse really is our key to kind of getting upstream and, in addition to the waste prevention, but when we're talking about just managing materials that exist, getting more reuse is going to help us move upstream. Let's talk about disposal. I'm the type of guy that likes to do, good news first. And so I presented the recovery in that picture, but now let's look at disposal. So in the most recent rate report, 3.7 million tons disposed of in 2022. That's about 1,700 pounds per person per year. And so this is that other, over 60% of materials that we're seeing that's still being disposed. Where is this taking place? So when we look in the region, look at the map first, and you'll see there's 4 landfills and a whole network of transfer stations here. 2 of those landfills are regional, where they're taking materials from a wide range. 2 of them are local, where they're taking from a smaller, more localized origin source. This pie chart, though, I thought was really interesting to me. It's only 15% of the total landfills in the state take place in this or exist in this county. Whereas the remaining, so that's 4 of them, so the remaining 22 are outside of the county. And so when we look at the whole state as a whole, you look at these big blue dots, these are the landfills that are across the state. So you see a much greater prevalence of this type of system for managing materials outside of the region. And so many of these are small kind of local landfills, but several of them are large regional landfills that are not only taking materials from a wider region, some of the materials from this region are going there. They're also taking materials from other states as well. So Washington is sending their materials to some of these landfills. So they're large importing facilities. And so this is where it kind of all gets really interesting for me when I was looking at the data. So that 70% origin of disposal we looked at before from this region, only 29% of that material is actually ending up in this region. And so where this region is a net importer of materials for recovery, it is an exporter of materials for disposal. And so again, this might not be a surprise to folks in this room, but to me, I thought this really put a fine point to put the data behind it and really understand that. And with the Covanta plant shutting down, Coffin Butte's lifespan, on the horizon, pretty close to us. And these trends that we saw with waste generation continuing to increase, this kind of compounds the issue where, it really sets the table, like, now what? So like one line of thinking is, where do we export more, an increasing amount of materials? Or I think really why we're all in the room here is that, there might be a better option for managing these materials, and that this is a window of opportunity where we can be thoughtful for what happens next, rather than continuing this trend that's going to get, exacerbate over time. So to that end, kind of in my practice in consulting, the first thing to do when considering options for managing stuff is to understand what that stuff is to manage. And so here is a picture. This is the most recent characterization, which is back. It was updated in 2018. And so this is what the picture looks like. Food and organics is number one. Paper, wood, which a lot of that is building materials, and then the inorganic C&D, concrete, asphalt bricks, shingles, then plastics, metals, textiles, kind of down the line. This isn't really a surprise. I've yet to see a waste composition that did not have organics as number one. That's very typical. But we are going to see some new data coming in pretty soon, and we're going to do this same exercise when it comes in. DEQ's already finished the sorting, the composition study, I think, is imminent, and I'm not sure, but within kind of the period of this task force, we should be seeing the updated numbers, and we can kind of look at it again. But at the end of the day, like, I don't expect it to be a great deal different. I think the trends are going to be similar, and we're probably going to see the same kind of suite of materials there. So I did a little bit of preliminary analysis, and I do emphasize preliminary, and kind of mapped each one to what I would consider the highest best use based on how it's characterized. And what we see here are some options. And so if you take a look at this, in the green is food, where part of this food is rescuable. So 9% is identified as edible food. And so of what's going into the waste stream, based on the data we see, 9% could be rescued. The other 14% could be composted or digested. And in addition to that, the compostable paper as well. You see several recyclable options of materials that could be recyclable that's being thrown away. You see a great deal of C&D reuse and recycle, and then you've got your essentially 28% that is essentially kind of disposal, no matter what. And so kind of what I want to point out here is that there's kind of three buckets for recovery interventions. Or materials management intervention. So first we have the food and organics, almost a quarter of the pie. And then we have what I would call products, paper, and packaging. And so this includes textiles, this includes e-waste, this includes all of like our curbside recyclables. A lot of these materials that we're seeing in various NPR constructs. And so these are grouped into that category. And then we have the built environment here, this other category here as well. And so in total, we see here that, according to this, again, preliminary analysis, theoretically 72% of the disposal could be recovered through recycling. Is kind of the map for the largest amount of material. Rescue and reuse is another 21%, and composting and digestion is a little bit over 13%. And so, an area of research that we haven't addressed is, how much can be reduced through prevention. We heard a lot of great concepts from DEQ on the food and built environment. So I really want to find a way to like integrate that into this analysis as well, to add that at that segment. And the very last slide, I saw Jane, you had a question.
I was just gonna ask about the remaining 28% for the purpose of clarity.
Yeah.
What are those major components?
Yeah, so it is just, there's like a wide range, but it's the things like disposable diapers, like cat litter. You know, there's I don't know if you've looked at the characterization study, but there's maybe 50 or 60 lines, and it's kind of a catch-all for a lot. And so I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but I think like diapers, cat litter, things like that is what comes to mind. And there are certain things that are characterized as plastic not recoverable that end up there. Things like that. And so the thing that I want to end on here is one last point is that sustainable materials management doesn't only have an environmental benefit. There's also economic impacts that can result from managing this waste to the highest and best use. This is a study that I often refer to as from the TELUS Institute, and it's a little bit aged in 2011, but it still provides really great insight where they did a study on the number of jobs associated with different diversion activities. You'll see here, if you look closely, if we're just disposing of waste, whether it's landfill or incineration, you're getting about 2/3 of a job for 1,000 tons processed, and that's including collection. Recycling creates multiples of this with about 5 jobs just to get them sorted into commodities. And then when you get to the manufacturing using recycled content and the reuse remanufacturing, you're getting, 20 jobs or more, up to 20 jobs, more if you include the collection of that material for 1,000 tons of materials. So I think this really also frames the opportunity where it's not just the environmental benefits, there's economic benefits as well that are associated with these alternate ways of managing it. So that's what we have now. I think I kind of hit exactly lunchtime, but maybe there's some time for some questions. John, I think I saw you.
Yeah, you were talking about reuse and quantifying that. Is there anyone, or is there a standard for measuring the impact of reuse environmentally? And if so, is anybody that you were aware of or anybody's aware of that's doing that?
Yeah, and I'll invite you to talk, Liz, as well. I mean, this is a question that comes up a lot, and there was a group in New York that had developed a reuse calculator, and it's behind a paywall, and so it's not something that's available for other people. And so we are actively working with folks to try to recreate that, but I think a reuse impact calculator is something that is on everyone's wish list that's working in the space. Would be great. To do. So I don't know, Liz, if you have more information.
Yeah, and I would say the New York reuse impact calculator isn't even behind a paywall, it's behind a government red tape wall. Is what it is. They don't want to share it with any other government, and it's not the teams, it's just the government processes. So Metro is actively working on really figuring out how to create that data around reuse. Washington State, Oregon Metro. Sorry, I put Tom is with Oregon Metro, so I just expect him to be the full representation of Metro. So, and really, there's a lot of challenges. And I think the reuse folks in the room could also speak to this, there's no uniformity of material. You don't know what you're gonna get. You could say, hey, I'm gonna take a bunch of couches for reuse. And you could get a love seat, you can get a little stiff, antique Victorian couch, you could get a big old love seat or a sectional. So there's no uniformity to it. So, really what this reuse impact calculator does is it kind of tries to identify it as best as possible. So it's just, we're dealing with so many different types of materials. It's not, with the recycling stream where it could just say, okay, PET plastic goes in here, these bottles here. So there's a lot of moving parts that go into that, but I would say the industry is really trying to figure that out. And I will say too, with measurement, my pet peeves is trying to put tons on reuse because we don't think garbage or solid waste and recycling thinks in tons because we're trying to get as much of that stuff gone as possible versus reuse. We're trying to say, hey, how can we keep this in the stream that it can be usable to someone? So we think in pounds or item counts. So that's just my.
Yeah, Terry, you got something to contribute?
Well, the thrift industry actually does have very accurate metrics on this.
Yes.
And the thrift industry across the board has to have these metrics in order to survive. So a certain amount of this material or that material really does have to have a way to be measured as to what's disposed of versus what is recovered. That's becoming increasingly important as the industry is starting to deal with post or pre-manufactured, pre-consumer materials. So the Amazon return things, the surpluses from the industry are now very carefully monitored. So actually, if you wanted to get that data, you could probably extrapolate that pretty much out of the industry statistics.
And I did a report last year, 2 years ago, on more large household item waste, and we worked closely with Goodwill, and they definitely are tracking that stuff, and it's just more, at the localized scale where, these like smaller nonprofits and stuff really struggle, but if there's like, I think if we can come to a uniform standard, between the thrift industry and other areas of reuse, I think it can be a really powerful tool.
Well, I think the step further then is also, and then putting it in a context that can be looked at alongside these other recovery options, so that you can have a decision-making apparatus.
I guess the thought that was coming to my mind was, part of the impetus of this whole task force was the closure of Coffin View, or the impending closure of Coffin View. I guess, what is sort of the makeup of the material that is going there now that this region potentially will have to be managing, and how does that differ from some of the other regional waste?
I am not sure, like, this study takes samples from a lot of different facilities. I'm not sure if we could isolate the sample. I tend to think that there's not a huge deal of variation locally between kind of material habits. And so I think that this is kind of a reasonable framework for what we expect to be in there.
I guess, is Coffin View strictly an MSW landfill, or are they taking any other types of like ag waste or those types of materials?
I don't know about the ag waste question. Yeah, I'm not sure. I have not looked at a specific composition study for Coffin, but that could be something to look into. I'm sure I would imagine we could probably extrapolate.
They might not take that material at all. I'm assuming somebody would know what materials are accepted for landfill, because I think that's sort of the, we're focused right here on MSW, but are there other waste streams that might be flowing there that are large that we might want to be thinking outside the box about?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, especially like industrial and consumer. Yeah.
Sorry, so if we're sitting at about 40-ish% recovery now, theoretically 70-ish% recoverable, what is there? Have you guys looked at other states to see if they have a higher recovery rate? Are we an outlier high? Are we middle? We're low? And how high can we conceivably affordably get to?
Yeah,
based on what other states are doing.
I haven't done that comparison.
Okay.
Recently, I think it's something I've done in the past, and I have actually tended to see Oregon as a high performer.
Okay.
So I think this is, where do we want to be leaders? Where do we want to continue to push the envelope? I'm not exactly sure that we would see many states with a sort of considerably higher recovery rate. If you're comparing, it's pretty difficult to compare apples to apples because it's all about how they measure it.
Yeah.
But I've generally categorized Oregon as a high performer, generally compared to other states.
Yeah, the bottle bill alone, like, is so much higher than even other bottle bill states. And that's a sliver, but it's a sliver that we do that nobody else is doing.
Say another, I think, important framework when thinking about this picture, and we heard the term zero waste up earlier, is Oregon, we're not really a zero waste state, so we're not just chasing tons. And we're not just chasing a higher diversion rate, we're trying to chase environmental outcomes, environmental benefits, and DEQ is really leading the way on that. So I think it's important for us to also think about there will be waste. And we're not trying to achieve zero waste, because that might not be the best environmental outcome for the planet and everyone in Oregon. So we have to really think about high impact materials and chasing those materials and treating them most beneficial way, not trying to achieve zero waste. So I think it results in strategies like what you might see in other states where they just invest in incineration and burn it because they can consider that diversion. And then you'll see states with 106% recovery rate. That's not even possible because they're burning trash from other states and they're counting it as recovery. So
Yeah. I always like to think of things as kind of like a cascading effect, and you're not looking at, I kind of hate the premise of it's one or the other. I think everything needs to be on the table. Everything has its purpose. And without landfills, we would be dealing with either like litter, open dumps, unregulated. It'd be a much worse situation. So like landfills aren't bad. They have a role, and like we need to optimize that role and kind of peck our way down that hierarchy and, you know, capture whatever we can up until that point, and then have a, you know, a great way of managing, and we have a great framework and regulation for managing landfills, and let's continue to utilize those when needed.
we spent, what, 25 years in this industry vilifying the landfill to encourage recycling, and now everyone's scared of the landfill. And it's better than sending materials to Southeast Asia to be open dumped in the ocean than here in a regulated landfill.
100%. Well, I don't want to keep us any further from lunch. So hopefully that kind of, I don't know, what the palette, and we've got more interaction and in-depth conversation for this afternoon. And hopefully we're able to do some level setting and kind of have a good understanding of kind of where things stand today.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Bryce and Joel. They've done a lot of great job on really digging into that research. And Allegra's their quiet power spacing machines. I'm going to ask Sean, oh, no, who am I? Oh, so food is outside in the hallway. Feel free to mill about, come back in the room. There's a space for food. That way.
Yeah, so the food is right here in the hallway, and for those of you who are gluten-free, vegan, vegetarian, there is a sandwich option there. There are also corn chips there that are abide by those dietary restrictions, and then the dips are all gluten-free. One of the dips also is vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free. So everything's labeled, but please, yeah, right out here in the hall, help yourselves.
And please, come back to start back at 12:45. Let's chicken sandwiches are good, unless you're a vegetarian, then I don't recommend it at all. So for this afternoon, we are going to hear a couple of case studies with direct examples on some really great resources on what can be added to a system, or, you know, really how to have some, you know, systems thinking. And then we'll go into discussions and have some afternoon activities to kind of shake it off. So I know sometimes, you know, the post-lunch meeting side of things, you know, it's not the speaker, it's just, you know, it's easy to kind of get into a lull. So feel free to stand up as you need and top off your coffee. So with that, I'm really excited that Lauren Zimmerman on staff, new addition, with the City of Portland's Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, who specializes in deconstruction and sustainable buildings, is here with us. So Lauren is the specialist and conducts research and collaborates with other cities, regional councils, and national coalitions to develop policy recommendations that will reduce the embodied carbon of building materials, construction practices, and construction waste management in Portland and beyond. So really happy to have Lauren here to talk about deconstruction. Thank you, and more.
Thanks for having me, folks. I'm pretty loud and I'm pretty fast in this presentation, so hopefully you're more overwhelmed with information than you are bored. I could talk about deconstruction and how it started and how we got going for about 2 hours. I've put 25 slides in just for your information to check out later. There's no way I can get to all of them. So I'm going to try to leave some time for your specific questions, and we can go find the slide or whatever's going to fit best. So a little bit of history on me. So I used to build houses. I worked for an architecture firm in Portland, Inc. from Morrison for years. I joined the city in an embodied carbon focused role. So anything in the building life cycle that could reduce emissions, promote sustainable materials. I was in that role for a year and published a set of recommendations around that. If anyone is interested in seeing those, be happy to share them. Now I've joined our solid waste and recycling team. And my role focuses on anything construction and demolition policy related, and I run our deconstruction program. I'm doing the screen one because it doesn't seem to be looking. So here are the policies that kind of govern this work. So a little bit of background on how Portland got to this. So, you know, the most sustainable building is one that is preserved, not having to build a new building. We want to extend the usable life of our buildings. But that doesn't always work, right? We need to change uses, things change hands, there are different reasons in the market. And so this is, of course, like most cities, what our demolition looked like up to 2016, just gorgeous old houses being crunched up, no real chance for material reuse because those materials are too degraded by the time they get to a material recovery facility to really pull out quality reusable parts. We had a lot of demolition permit increase in the early teens from economic recovery. And we had two opposing forces. We had developers saying, we want to take stuff down faster so we can build new things. And then we had community groups saying, stop taking things down so fast. We have no time to intervene in the process. And we're really worried about all this dust we're seeing. If it has lead in it, if there are chips of asbestos flying, we're really worried. So the community groups went to city council. City council heard that and directed my Bureau of Planning and Sustainability to take a look at solutions, and particularly they were curious about deconstruction. So Sean Wood, who was the person who started our deconstruction program, he's now at the EPA, still doing salvage materials work. He convened the Deconstruction Advisory Group in 2015 and brought all these stakeholders together to figure out what could be possible in managing these materials. So the recommendations that they offered council weren't if a house should come down, but how and what is the process and is there a chance to save materials? Also at the time, we had these market opportunities. The hog fuel market was drying up. We are fortunate in Portland to have this really strong DIY salvage ethic, tons of thrift stores, tons of salvage shops in existence. Real love of that Northwest wood, the vintage aesthetic. And then as far as supply, we had established retail marketplaces. So a really critical one was the Rebuilding Center that was taking in donations of salvage materials. And they also started deconstructing homes in the neighborhood that center is in. Because for the same reason, they saw so many houses coming down, they wanted to offer a service to get a hold of those materials, sell them in their shop that could then supply all the other neighboring very old buildings for that one specific type of wood flooring of that one cut nobody makes anymore in modern materials, which helps increase the usable life of those buildings. This is a slide for you to check out later. This is kind of that fight between the developers and the neighborhood organizations and why deconstruction was a decent solution for both of them to say, we're going to preserve some of our built history, make these materials usable, but also increase the chances we will discover and properly manage hazardous materials. So the Deconstruction Advisory Group decided on a multi-phase approach to deconstruction. So at first we said, we're going to incentivize deconstruction and train a bunch of folks in how to do it. We already had a couple of companies in town doing deconstruction, but we knew we would need 5, 10, 15, 20 to handle several permits ongoing all the time. So that was 2015 to 2017. Our original ordinance was passed in 2016, and we decided to set the parameters on what houses had to be deconstructed as anything 1916 and older, houses, duplexes, and anything that was registered historic resource. We did that so that we would catch about a third of the pie. So of all the demolition permits up to 1916 was around a third, and we knew we would probably increase that year built at some point. We did just a couple of years later to be 1940. So this is our ordinance today. There's another about 1/3 of permits that is 1941 and more recent. I always get the question, are you gonna go for all houses? We might, but there's really a loss of returns from houses any more recent than the 60s because of the amount of foam, glues, different construction types where it's just not as easy to pull things apart, like houses from the 20s that have simple fasteners and really high quality materials, especially from all our old growth lumber, that type of stuff. So we did this kind of bite-sized factor to just make sure we were phasing how much the industry could take on. These are the salvageable materials. Number one is lumber. We get a lot of calls for, hey, this house is really ugly. I think it's half asbestos. Mice have pooped in it. You don't want this house. And I'm like, oh, really? Behind all those finishes is all this awesome lumber that is the number one thing reused, and it's a heavyweight material that really helps on diversion, right? So a lot of houses that folks are hoping they can get an exemption, they're very sad to find out I still want the skeleton of the house. Pretty much every project still throws out some doors, windows, wood flooring, all these. Either the deconstruction contractors have pathways, they sell or donate them, or Rebuilding Center will come and grab them. So we only track the lumber since it's the biggest, heaviest thing and most consistent. We track if another type of material was recovered from a house, but not the quantities. So I don't know how many windows from each house. And they're all so different. What other types of things? We just said, let's start with the lumber since that's the big one. So program startup and admin, which is probably critical for all of you folks to hear more about. I put together, this was a real rough estimate on our program startup costs. City of Honolulu called, curious. So we're one full-time employee, it's me, and it's not my whole job. I only have right now 2 to 3 permits a week, and my review of them is pretty quick. I do occasional inspections. Our permitting bureau helps with part of the work too, but we have a really great collaboration where they trust that I'm going to process the permits fast enough, and I trust they will direct people to me for deconstruction. We have flags in the permitting system that kick a house into my queue for review. So again, this is information you can check out later if you're looking at program costs. One thing I'll note is we do have administrative rules that define violations. What happens if someone says they're deconstructing a house, you go to site and it's just a bulldoze of, threw it in a bunch of roll off and you're like, oh, okay, that's not what we thought deconstruction was. So we do occasionally send out violations. And one thing that we were curious about is if contractors would treat this just as the cost of doing business, that the violations, they would say, we're gonna bulldoze it anyway. If we get $1,000 violation, who cares? And that hasn't been the case. For the most part, we see very few violations, and the costs between deconstruction and demolition have become much more equal over time.
Is that $500 the only sort of
Violation
enforcement
cost?
violation? Like, there's no other, like, you get dinged, for being
There-
recommended or?
There are different violations depending what it is. It's, the worst one being you knocked down the house, threw it in a dumpster, didn't tell anybody, to you didn't post a sign, which is usually just one of these from me, more than a violation type thing.
Just for clarity, you said the cost of deconstruction and demolition are coming closer together?
Yes.
How?
How?
I mean.
I'm gonna get into it
okay,
in
I was
another
gonna say, I've torn apart duplexes before where you're taking off
It
each
takes a
sheet of
lot of time.
drywall and all that, having a excavator on site, smash it 3 times and then start loading it into
Yep.
dumpsters is quick. I mean,
Yep. Yep. I'll get to that in a minute.
I'm all ears.
So contractor training, we did training with existing contractors who were interested in expanding into deconstruction. There were some existing deconstruction companies also included in this, essentially to make sure the service was relatively uniform across all the contractors. That you're not having, some of them use different practices, and we used Reuse Consulting as our trainer. Dave Bennick, who's kind of the trainer of trainers nationwide. He's up in Bellingham. He was around for all of it. And then after the ordinance, we did workforce development, really prioritizing folks who had any traditional barriers to construction. That might be women, that might be people with issues in their employment history, things where they had barriers to employment. And we have some really touching feedback we received over time of people saying they were really grateful for the opportunity. And it's a great entry-level construction role because you're learning how to take a house all apart, and then it's pretty easy to learn afterward how to put it all together. So really great training opportunity. Certification requirements, all the deconstruction contractors are asbestos and lead abatement mitigation certified. That also helps them take on other types of services, which is something I'll get into. Just passing a test, they get on our certified deconstruction contractor list. We have the most certified deconstruction contractors of any city in the world. That's pretty incredible at 15. Four of those businesses are specifically dedicated to deconstruction and also have their own salvage shop. So we have a place where they are able to offset some of their service costs in the deconstruction because they will make money off of the materials. So that has affected the marketplace, the cost of deconstruction. And it also, each company kind of has their own niche. Some of them have a salvage shop. Some of them also do demo or abatement or hauling services. So if you want to get into decon in Portland, you kind of have to pair it with another service to be able to make it work. Contractor admin, this is what one of our forms looks like. I ask for photos of the bundles of wood. I do random inspections on site. Some contractors are better than others, so some of them don't get inspected quite as often because they generally provide great documentation. Others are kind of terrible at it, so I show up on their sites more often. So impact. So since 2015, the line you see here is deconstructions. And the taller blue columns are demolition. So before we started, everything was demo, no decon. It has risen over time. In the last few years, we got to the point where it was about 2/3 of permits exactly like we wanted, with some exemptions still occurring. In 2023, this has changed a little bit, and part of that is our super low development cycle right now. Very few new things getting built. We have fewer permits overall. And of the permits we have, there are more exemptions or weird things going on because they're kind of like the bottom of the barrel of redevelopment properties. So they're weird and they're small and half of them had a fire at some point, or the abatement on them is so high that they have limited reuse value. So I just wanted to point that out. We are achieving what we wanted with more deconstructions, but the market you are currently in will affect every single thing about a deconstruction program. And so we kind of have been looking at it like, what is this going to look like in a high development cycle versus a low one, and being prepared for that for materials and keeping the deconstruction contractors in business and how permitting is going to change, all those things. So benefits and outcomes, we have done over 600 house deconstructions. That number is actually tiny compared to the total deconstructions. They're probably over 1,000 if you include sheds, garages, and commercial projects. They don't get tracked through our program because they're not part of the ordinance, is only to residential, single family or duplex homes. But what that shows is that deconstruction is taking on is a best practice. And to answer your question, Shane, one of the reasons the price is more equal at this point is because Portland adopted new demolition rules that require any painted surface on the exterior of a house, anything residential that is painted from before 1978. They just say, we know you've got lead in there and you have to manually deconstruct those materials. And so that actually made the price of demo go up because you have kind of a second service in there from traditional demo to like deal with these exterior. So decon has been competitive and has come down, and demolition has gone up. And so they're relatively equal depending on what size the house is. For a huge house, it's not equal. For smaller ones, it is. We see a lot of sheds, garages, those kind of things deconstructed because of that demolition requirement. So that is helping catch deconstruction even further. As far as jobs, we estimated somewhere in the low 30s at least added to Portland area, which sounds kind of low, but we already had some of these deconstruction contractors in existence. So what it actually did was solidify these small businesses and keep them afloat longer instead of contractors that kind of rise and fall with different types of regulations. I mentioned, and then per house, we get 3 to 4 tons diverted. So from Joel's note that per year per person, 1,724 pounds, that's about a quarter of a house. So when you compare the volumes we're going through, working on policies that get bad C and D materials has this sudden huge impact versus other habit changing policies because it's built into the permit system. How bad am I on time?
Maybe a couple more minutes.
Okay. Some more benefits and outcomes. This is a program called Access to Access. It's houses that through our Empowered Neighborhoods program might have a code violation. They get in contact with our permitting bureau. We connect with them to get materials to improve their home, keeping them in their home, anti-displacement strategy, also helping these old homes beautify again. And some of that is from materials coming from the deconstruction program because they're the only old materials that will match the old houses. Like I noted, deconstruction is now a best practice, and it pushed for new mechanical demolition requirements. Unexpected outcomes is probably what you're really curious about. The rise and fall of salvage shops and decon contractors. Our first decon contractor rebuilding center, they no longer do the service. It doesn't fit in their model anymore. We've had other contractors get certified for a job or two, get over it, drop back off the list. We have kind of the core 5 who do the majority of our permits, who really know how to make it work. We've had great salvage shops like Salvage Works go out of business and all the other shops buy out their wood and the material flows just kind of change. There's cutthroat competition for sure. There are moments where I'm not sure where the wood is going, is also critical to know. We have them document the amounts where they're sold to, but it's just me. I can't be out there in compliance checking every single site. There, you start to get hints at who might just be throwing away the wood, and so I've been digging into those channels. And then one really critical one I want to note is that Oregon State Residential Structural Code allows for the reuse of salvage lumber in residential houses, ADUs, those type of things, subject to local building code approval, local building official approval. Portland hasn't operationalized that yet, and everyone's shocked to hear this, but you can't build a new house with pure salvage wood in Portland. So it's kind of amazing that this wood is finding a home. It's often in siding, flooring, interior architectural paneling, a lot of different places. So I'm pushing really hard for Portland Permitting and Development to operationalize that part of code so that that wood has another market pathway in the city. My dream would be an ADU kit of parts, something like that, so that we have our great residential infill programs in Portland with accessory dwelling units able to take on the wood in a very low risk place because they're small structures, easy to build, that type of thing. Here's a project in Corvallis I got a call about a while ago. They are going to be required to deconstruct this to comply with SHPO. And they were kind of like, what? How? Like this house? Are you sure? And so I explained this looks like a house we would normally get 3 to 4 tons of material out of. So I'm happy to keep consulting on that one. I don't know where it is in process. Opportunities for partnership. One thing I'm really jealous of your location further down on I-5 is you're closer to more millwork companies that regularly do this type of work. Pioneer Millworks takes down all sorts of wood structures and turns that wood into new products. Trillium Pacific does the same thing. They make all sorts of products. Urban Machine is a AI-driven robotic denailer. So if you had a particular facility that was getting enough wood, it might be worthwhile to rent an Urban Machine, denail it all. They help you find end markets for that wood. And 2 other things are, Oregon building trends, everything mass timber and everything modular housing. Salvage wood can go into either of those in special ways. It just takes a lot of coordination and maybe some grant work. So I think you heard most of the takeaways. A big one is if you're working on your house, just stop it with all the foam and glue. So we can eventually take apart our buildings we're building today and keep them in circular materials. And I have some links you can check out later. All right.
Thank you.
Do you want to do a question now or after?
Let Terry,
Yeah.
because we only have about 20-ish minutes, and then, we'll have more questions. I'll be quick on my intro, for Terry McDonald, the now, Emeritus Director of St. Vincent de Paul, and just if you're in the reuse repair and probably just in this region, Terry's reputation precedes him, and he's just been such a huge impact on this work, so take it away.
So I represent the thrift industry. The thrift industry in the state of Oregon generates about $400 million a year, and we process about 1,000 tons of used goods per day. So it's a relatively interesting sector that has a lot of impact. One of the largest ones is on reuse or else deconstruction. In 2000, St. Vincent de Paul of Lane County became the first commercially viable mattress recycler in the United States. And over the last 25 years, we've processed about 5 million mattresses. If you think about it, that's enough mattresses to go around the world 3 times. And about 80% of a mattress can be recycled. And they go into all things like the carpet pad underneath this is made out of the polyurethane foam from mattresses and the toppers. Residential carpet pads made out of polyurethane foam. The wood goes back to the wood industry, the steel goes back to the steel industry. It's an industry that, of course, now is coming to the state of Oregon because of the product stewardship bill that was passed in 2022. And we anticipate that just out of our operation in Eugene, we'll be processing about 120 to 130,000 mattresses per year. So it's a significant amount of materials. Likewise, over the last few years, we've really gotten into polystyrene recycling, expanded polystyrene, block styrofoam. We process about 120,000 pounds of that a month. It's actually financially viable for us. So it's one of those things that we found a way to make that thing profitable for us. And if you ever want to get rid of all your polystyrene and you bring it down to Eugene, block styrene, not post-consumer, not post-food, but block styrene, we'll take all for free, just because we love you so much. Another interesting area is that we should be probably following along what other states are trending, what they're doing. Because what we know out of the industry is it's evolving everywhere. So California just is passing a legislation on all textile recycling, and that they're going to be requiring that all textile comes out of the system. I am devilishly curious about how that's going to work. But I think that there is actually some opportunities. It would be largely based upon the work that's been done in the shredding industry. So for years and years and years, post-consumer clothing that was the lowest value was turned into blankets and other things through a shredding operation by Chandlian Enterprises or LA Fiber. I think that that's going to be an expanding market. I think it's one that we ought to be taking a look at. It doesn't require that much equipment, and it actually creates something that's very useful for homeless shelters, which is another thing we're used to, is getting the emergency blankets to come out of that particular system. CFC appliances and appliance recycling, it's always been one of the things that we've always liked a lot because so much of the product is reusable. So about 5% to 10% of all the appliances, the same as small processes, and we process somewhere around, Jeff, I don't know, a lot. About 10% of them are reusable, and so we do the rebuilding ourselves. Likewise, specializing in how to divert materials that are specialized out of the waste stream, like books. We process about 5 tons of books. They don't come primarily from Oregon. They primarily come from California, from friends and library programs in the Bay Area. We bring them up here, process them. We sell about 2,000 a day in our stores, and we sell the other 1,000 of them online. It's a revenue generator for us, but then also 100% of that book paper then can go back into the pulp industry, eliminating that particular waste stream entirely. There's all kinds of other little activities that you can get into that are commercially viable. And I'm really here to tell you more than anything else is that the trick on this industry for us has been making sure that we are able to get a single stream of materials across the board. If you have it all commingled, it's the old story about garbage in and garbage out. If you don't take advantage of the opportunities of having stuff discreetly pulled apart, then you can't make it work. And for us, once we're into a waste stream where we have one type of material, we usually go to that waste stream and say, do you have this? And do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? So I said at St. Paul, we take in about 100 tons of materials a day, reusables. About half of it comes from other waste streams. And that's because we have peeled those waste streams out of materials that we want from them. So from dumps as far away as Scotland, and we do receive a container of Pottery Barn actually a day. Materials that are left over from their warehouses from New Jersey and Atlanta, Georgia. All of those materials are coming into our operations that are 100% reusable. So there's ways to peel the waste stream that are actually pretty cost effective. Another one of the interesting things about what we've been doing is developing how we can do more housing. So they're talking about the modular industry. We actually were funded by the legislature in 2022 to set up the first nonprofit mobile home manufacturing facility in the United States. And that is now operational. It's Hope Community Corporation. About less than 1% of all the building materials that go into that cannot be reused in one form or another. So it's actually extremely efficient. And the other part of it is driving down the cost of construction. So these units that are coming out of our facility right now, it's a single wide 52 foot by 14, 744 square foot unit. Runs, it's a NEEM certified, so it's super energy efficient, 2x6 on 16 inches of construction. So it's completely standard construction, hardy plank siding and everything else. Runs out at $100 a square foot out of the door. That's about 1/4 of the cost of construction in the regular facility. And the other part on it is that we're also using that facility to train young people from the area high schools into the trades. So it's a complete circle of how you have a sustainability project that comes out of that. So there's lots of other opportunities around this. So we work with a network of nonprofits around the United States called the Cascade Alliance. That Cascade Alliance is made up of other nonprofits in every other state that we have contact with, 30 different nonprofits. Each one of us looking for a specialized niche in the marketplace where we can make money off of the waste stream in a way that's non-traditional. The message I bring to you is that there is a lot of money in waste, and it's not putting it into the ground, it's finding another use for it. Thank you.
You'll wanna just answer from your seat, so you're welcome to come back up. We're just gonna open up to you all. That's a lot of great information on these two wonderful programs. I'm such a fangirl, Terry. I mean, I'm a fangirl of Lauren and the great work that she's doing, but I just love this like systems approach and like. I'm gonna share one of the first stories I ever heard from Terry about mattress recycling, how it found a market for the dead skin that came off of the mattresses. And it was just the funniest story and best story I've ever heard of like finding a market for everything. But yeah, I would love to open it up to you all to ask, you know, both Lauren and Terry some questions about their respective programs and really how you see this could be integrated into a regional system. John.
So Terry, you mentioned about you were connected to housing, you connected to the mobile home. For the deconstruction, has there been any matching of the deconstruction with the growing need for housing?
Give me their names if you can find
Yeah.
anyone. We've been trying to, we have a couple of grant applications out right now that would connect the dots. The biggest thing we're trying to figure out, we want to pilot it with a community development corporation to try like either ADUs or cottage cluster to kind of prove the product. And then we would be willing to invest in a facility or a contract for someone who can process the materials into what is needed for the building.
Kind of a go-between.
Yeah.
As an interesting sideline on that, city or Lane Metropolitan Waste District has a program for growing poplars off of the sludge left over from municipal solid waste. And those poplars get to a certain size, and then at that point they're harvested. And Green Recycling has been taking some of that wood and putting it out into the marketplace. And we believe that if we move some of that wood down, we can use it for doors, windows, and trim around the housing units that we're manufacturing. So it's actually a way for us to integrate the whole thing together. Yeah.
How did you get started in this, and how much physical space does it require to have an operation like yours?
Well, we got into it because I needed the money. And this is back in the 1980s when the timber industry collapsed and everybody was having a heck of a time doing anything. So we needed three things. We needed jobs in Lane County, we needed money, and we needed affordable housing. And so we took a look at the waste stream and said, well, that's where the money is, and that's where the jobs are. And then we can get the affordable housing out of the profits. That's how we got started. So we just did it one step at a time. We did appliance recycling, then mattress rebuilding, then mattress deconstruction and glass factories and blah, 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 blah. It just kind of rolls out once to the next. Actually, one of our most interesting markets, very profitable right now, is used candles. So we process probably about 4 tons of waste plastic or waste candles, ones that are half burned and whatever else, per year. And they're put back into basically a product we call brick wax, craft wax that you sell in the store operations in the craft department at this time of the year. And it's basically a 2-pound chunk of wax that was a candle that we put into a soup maker. When we sorted it by color through the soup maker, melts it down, dips out all the wicks and whatever else, roll it out, put it into a bread pan, sells for about $6 a piece, and we sell about 4 tons a year. You can always do something. Yeah.
So something like that, where do you get the materials? Is it
Dumps.
You
Dumps.
sorting through solid waste?
No, we don't do that. We just go to the waste system down in, for example, in California, San Francisco, say, if you got candles, we'll take them. They send us about a ton a month.
Mhm.
You can specialize the waste stream to meet your needs, because they need to get rid of the stuff. California has a required diversion total. So they have to be at 80% diversion or else they actually get fined in every system down in California. So they're highly motivated to get the stuff diverted.
So are they just sorting materials at the transfer stations down there? Like, here's the candle wax.
Yep.
Then.
Yeah, and we'll take it in mixed colors, but then it just comes up in barrels and then just sort it out in there. And then the stuff that's commingled in color, that goes into another product called EcoFire. That's burlap bags that we soak with wax and then cut into little pieces, put in EcoFire, put in for fire starters.
But I think finding like, so we partner with them and, things like mattresses, so it's like, Terry's gotta charge us to haul the mattresses away and process them, and so we charge customers, because we're like the one-stop shop, right? We're more expensive than if you go to 6 different shops to get rid of all your waste, but people wanna go to the transfer station, as we all know. And so, we're able to partner and say, well, you're gonna charge us, we're gonna charge them, and it works out really well, and then you got a trailer there, bring bonus, so it is following where are people bringing all the stuff, and as much as we want them maybe to separate all that stuff out and go to various places, we know that's not happening for a large portion of the population.
Well, and in that, of course, you've been the honest broker for us. That's where Bring Recycling has just recently put a trailer out next to our trailer, so the stuff that they need can come into their trailer and the one comes into ours. So finding a way to take advantage of the not-for-profit niche markets is an excellent way to go.
Right. But like the land, even, your model allows you to maybe get donated parcels, and then when he needs to grow, and so it's a really great, that nonprofit versus for-profit, and, it's been a great partnership.
Yeah.
I'm actually curious. So I heard that the rebuilding center was not getting very many of the materials from the deconstruction, and that a lot of it was either going to like wood recycling, but they weren't getting it. And I'm just curious is it mostly because of the diversion or selling it internally to the deconstruction companies, or is it? Anyway,
There are
any thoughts there?
Sure, there are a mix of factors going on there. One big one is that Rebuilding Center prefers denailed lumber. Nobody wants to pay their folks to denail it unless they have a good way to recapture the value of the donation. So there are a couple of deconstruction contractors who will offer as a part of their bid to the owner, this is our service cost, but we are going to get everything inventoried in a receipt for you from this donation where you're going to be able to write off $5,000 or something like that. And that helps make the service cost more palatable and gets materials to a rebuilding center. But only so many of them have the staff, the time, and have solved that financially to put that together versus, if someone can sell it and just get paid instantly if they want that. And there are three salvage shops that will pay for the wood in various states, either mail-y or unmail-y. And so the executive director of Rebuilding Center is interested in pushing us to go for a salvage minimum to make sure we're getting some minimum amount of diversion from every project, which is great, but that for all those reasons, that doesn't necessarily mean the materials will end up there. And so I'm kind of exploring all the barriers and blocks and how we can help get more materials to Rebuilding Center too.
So do they have to report on where the materials are diverted to?
They do.
Sold or they're.
But it's a pretty casual part of our reporting. So that's a big part that I would like to shore up.
Okay, thanks.
Since we have a couple of minutes, I just want to make one other comment. That is that product stewardship is not extended producer responsibility, and it really needs to be brought up. That's not what's really going on. A lot of these bills, like the mattress bill that just came through. Product stewardship means at the end of life, you're going to find a way to get rid of all the stuff. Extended producer responsibility is that the manufacturer of the product didn't make something that you couldn't recycle. And that's really where we are in the mattress recycling world right now. Is that the technology is not keeping up with the garbage that's going inside of mattresses as we speak. And so the result is the stuff that we're pulling out of mattresses is getting harder and harder to find a market for. And all the producers say is, well, it's your problem.
Yeah.
That is not extended producer responsibility.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah.
And it's something we talked about, and I'm realizing we didn't put a graphic in, we talked about, the waste hierarchy. We all know reduce, reuse, recycle, but then it's like we've flipped, that triangle upside down where the biggest part of the triangle is supposed to be reduce, right? But it's flipped on its head where it's landfill, recycling, other things, composting, some reuse, and so it's, we've kind of turned it on its head. So really, I think y'all are very well positioned to, really change that dynamic too. It's like, there's still a place for landfills, but it's that smallest part of that hierarchy, not the biggest part of it. Any final questions for Lauren or Terry? Yes,
I have
Bailey.
a question for Lauren. It's commendable, all the work that's being done in the city of Portland. I wonder how replicable, did I say that right? Replicable. You could see that being in, this larger swath of Oregon.
When I have talked to other cities, I always kind of give them a quick interview on what their story is, their building type, how expensive are their landfill fees, all those things are of course factors, and we have the benefit that the majority of our houses are wood. It's really high quality. Wood is such a plastic material that can be reused, turned into many different things again and again. That's not gonna be the case everywhere. If all of your houses are brick, you've got like a really huge problem, right? And so that's part of my role now too, is to say, hey, we're good on the wood, like what else? What can we do with concrete, masonry, brick? And so it is, our exact model is relatively replicable if you have similar parameters to Portland, but you might have, for example, one problem Portland has is we can't make our own building code that supersedes, well, we all have this problem, that supersedes state of Oregon building code. With some exceptions, you get to build your own things in. Washington, California don't have that problem. So if that state preemption clause were changed, Portland would probably have a field day with green building, and I could get all the materials I ever wanted pulled back out of houses and into, requiring them to be in new houses. So that's something I say to anybody outside of Oregon is you have this enormous opportunity with building code if you can find the people in waste to talk to the people in planning and building codes. So yeah, yes and no is the answer. But I get a call probably once a week from somewhere in North America and about once a month from somewhere out of North America for deconstruction. So everybody is looking in this direction, and a lot of folks are trying to solve the process. How do we change our transfer stations? How do we change this to take on, in Portland, it's still 25% of our solid waste is C&D. It's an enormous heavyweight opportunity. And the private market is incredibly salivating over helping us solve it too, certainly. So, yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to move us on. Those were some great case studies, and we're going to refer to those in the next part of this. I do want to say, as we're thinking about a regional solution, a lot of times we're thinking like, how can we tweak our existing system? How can we, what can we add to it? But a long time ago, since we live in, our beautiful state of Oregon, we think about earthquakes a lot. I was in an earthquake training, and, people, until they're hit with a disaster like an earthquake, they don't change their behaviors. They're not prepared. So sometimes it takes a, catastrophic event to make us change our behavior and completely change how we approach things. And we're hoping that we don't get to that point, right? Like, we don't want to get to 2037 and say, oh no, now what are we gonna do? We have nowhere to, take our solid waste. What do we do with our waste? So, the beauty of bringing this group together now is that we really have an opportunity to say like, hey, the system obviously isn't working. Otherwise we wouldn't be facing this, challenge or impending challenge. So really we want to think about like, what are our strategies? How do we change the system, or what do we keep in the system? What's working, what's not working? So really that's what our discussions are going to be about right now. So there are two key questions that really, Benton County has brought forward, and the Benton County Fox Trash Group really to think about, with bringing this task force together is, what can be accomplished to develop that sustainable materials management framework in the next 9 months to establish a regional sustainable materials management action framework. And what does a regional sustainable materials management action framework look like over the next 3 to 5 years? We're not gonna talk about it right now, but I want you to be thinking about this as we're going through our activities, as you're thinking about the system. I also beautifully wrote it there with a very sad dry marker. So when I change the screen, you could just keep it at the top of mind. And I believe it is also on the agenda, but those are two very important questions. Like, and it comes down to why are we here? Why are we sitting around this room? Why are you hopefully going to come back in January and hang out with me for a time? And it's because of these key questions. So in our conversations as we were preparing for this task force, really it's everything that I heard from, the Benton County team about our regional things, what Joel and Bryce were really finding in their data, it's like there's 4 main categories or buckets to really think about in developing a regional solution. The first lever, and it's not necessarily in order, I think they're all important, economic development opportunities, like we've heard today, like there's a great opportunity to build jobs and, but also to build businesses, also to create market development. So we're not sending materials, to other locations, that we're keeping it localized and helping build, our economy here in the state. Another lever is accessible and equitable systems. So, as we're talking about a sustainable materials management plan, like how is it really helping the people who live in the state? It's not just about the landfill, although that is part of it, but it's like, how do people, easily get rid of things in a way that is sustainable, and so whether it's being reused or recycled or composted, once it leaves somebody's house, that's a waste material to them. So however we define that, but it has to be accessible for people. And so, if we build a system that's only accessible to even 90% of the population, there's 10% that doesn't have access, then it's not an equitable system. So that's another framework that we really need to think about. And the third lever is policy and legislation, just like we've heard about, the deconstruction ordinance in Portland, like, are there regional levers we can pull? Are there statewide levers? Does that have to be down to the city level? So thinking about, what are the tools at our disposal to really create this change, and to have it be long lasting. So it goes beyond, so in 10 years after 2037 or 13 years, yeah, I've got a 2-year math. In 13 years after 2037, folks aren't having the same conversation. What do we do in 13 years when we run out of space? And then the last thing is just like Tara was talking about, like a systems-based approach, like if you can't reuse that mattress, how do you deconstruct it so that as much of the material can be reused or turned, recycled or turned into a new product, or, taken, whatever 20% is left and then getting the disposal method. So really thinking about it from a systems thinking lens, and it goes back to the waste hierarchy, if it can't be, there's not a system to reduce the waste, how do you reuse it? Can't be reused, what's the recycling methodology? And then we go into the compost and landfill. So really thinking highest and best use, and if you listen to, a lot of DEQ presentations, they have a really great framing. Like sometimes it's a lower carbon footprint to dispose of something in the landfill than it is to recycle it. Because if you think about it, as long as somebody has a way to do it, you could probably recycle most things, but it's like, is it feasible to do it? So I think that's also a lens that people have to think about. So I'm really glad that Tom brought up the zero waste thing. If you spend any time talking to me, I'm gonna geek out over materials. How do we reuse it? How do you get it into people's hands? However, to me, like zero waste is, zero waste is a really nice concept. And a lot of times they say, you can't reach a goal if you don't have one. So it's a really nice goal to have. However, we're humans, we're human beings. We have to have a waste product. And so I think, with this, it's like, we still have to keep in mind, landfills are just a part of, Bryce talked about all the great, or all the reasons why we need landfills, but it's also a health issue, and it's a public service that we have to have sanitary landfills. So as you're thinking about regional solutions, landfills are part of it. So I think, just being aware, but also not everything has to go in the landfill. I think, our system has gotten so out of control that it was just the easiest, cheapest, fastest way to get rid of things was to put in the landfill. So now we need to step that back and say, okay, what do we actually need to use the landfill for? Where do we need to put in these other levers? So that is our overarching, that's my overarching spiel on us getting into the next part of this activity. So now I'm going to ask that you take out your cell phones And it's basically on everything I shared, everything you heard from our other speakers today. We're going to create a word cloud. So if you will scan in this lovely QR code, you might have to zoom in a bit to get it. I think it's bigger on here. It will take you and it will ask you, what does a regional sustainable materials management system include? Write in any word that comes to mind. If you see a word coming up on the screen, feel free to repeat it. It's okay to have repeats. You can put as many words as you would like into the word cloud. Try scanning. And then a weird angle.
It's not reaching.
It's so tiny. I'm sorry, y'all.
You just wanted us to come up and.
I did. Come on, let's.
Pick on you.
I feel like I need music for this part.
Paparazzi or.
Yes.
Or a QR code.
I know, this is a very glary TV. Good luck. It's so shiny. I'm trying to try it from the screen. Oh, now here, do you want to try scanning that? Use yours too.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, that's what mine says too.
Oh. Doesn't like them, very sorry.
Like me either.
Would you like to share your words with me and you can upload it? How about that?
You could also go to your browser.
Yes, if you want to go to your browser, go to polev.com.
I'll try that.
/eStart0H4.
I have to refresh mine a couple times and go back.
There's some great words. Funding, what, we need money to do this? It's not gonna be free.
Yeah, I still get content messaging once it goes.
Do you have some words you'd like to share that you could put in for you?
There we go. You just try.
You know, if the words are larger, if that means more people, that is that
I believe that is the case.
that means that.
Cause sometimes like it'll repeat, words, but yeah, like each word cloud thing does it differently, but yes, I believe that is the case. I love collaboration,
Let me type anything.
advocacy.
Maybe it will.
Yeah, it says it's full.
Oh, it's full. Y'all had some great ideas. You were too slow to the draw, so you know. Don't worry, you're still gonna have more opportunities to share your ideas, but there's some amazing things on here. This is fantastic. You know, we have, oh, somebody is in there still. We have collaboration, funding, advocacy, communication. Let's see, my goodness, I need to know more about that.
I think there's, when we tried to put a 2-word
Yeah.
thing in there,
Oh.
just took one, because I put future proofing, and it's just perfect.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Ego checks, that is true, that's how we can work together. Convenient access, attainable, flexible, circular, sanctions, ooh, wanna hear more about that one. Feasibility, very important, innovation, great words, y'all, thank you so much, and hopefully this kind of got your wheels turning. So I'm gonna talk about our activity and I will come back to this. So this is kind of, this will be your inspiration for our big activity. I know that was like, get your wheels, creative wheels turning on an activity. So our next one is we're going to be, we're gonna mapping out a regional solution. Does not have to be to scale. As you will notice, I have some large sheets around the room. I'm going to have our task force members get into groups of 4 or 5, so there should be 4 different groups. So one group here, one group there, one where Sean and Rick are, and then one over there. So get into those groups, and you're gonna spend about 5 minutes or so really discussing the elements you would like to see built into a regional sustainable materials management plan. And here's some like questions just to kind of get your wheels turning, but it could be anything, you know, really what should be included to address materials management challenges? What needs to be added or changed from the existing system, and what's included in an ideal system? So when you get into your groups, you're gonna talk for about 5-ish minutes, and then you're gonna go to your giant sheets, and then I've provided each group with some very lovely stickers, fresh from my Canva art. So you get to use stickers, and then P and Allegra will pass out some markers for you all. We have Post-its too. Map out any system. Again, it doesn't have to be to scale. You could think of it like as what a local system looks like. You could think how reuse and recycling are, you know, connected. There's all kinds of things. And also I'm realizing I don't have repair and share economy on my stickers. I'm very sorry. So you'll have to write those in yourselves. But really, we're just gonna kind of like talk through what does a system look like? And then once you kind of have your plan, then you're gonna start mapping it out on your giant sheets. So I'll give you about 15 minutes to do that part, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about what you came up with. So as we do this activity, you're welcome to get up and stand at the sheets, or you can bring it back to your table. And then folks who are on the outer tables, I'm gonna ask that you mix it up, so we don't just have our electeds and then our government staff and DQ, like, you know, all separate. I want you all to kind of intermingle, break up into 2 different groups, and then I have a sheet for one group there and a sheet for another group, and then I'm gonna ask our consulting team to kind of walk around, answer any questions. Although you both would like to answer questions or join a group. So with that, I'm gonna have you get into your groups. I'm gonna go back to the word cloud. This is your inspiration. So think about what you'd like to see in a regional system. And you could be as creative or not creative as you would like. You could just write words down or anything. So about 5 minutes. So I'll let you guys kind of self-organize, but kind of stay in the folks that you're nearby. All right. All right. Took this into formalized policy now and print it up and the powers that be. Just kidding. The intention of this activity was to get those wheels spinning, to be thinking about our systems, all of that. But yeah, like just really quickly, I'd love to hear kind of just some things that bubbled up in your discussions and what you mapped from each group. So let's start with this group.
That's you.
Okay, we started out, because we have Terry in our group, thinking about how we get single product waste streams and how we incentivize that, and also thinking about matching end markets with waste streams that are abundant, not only here, but we can create these node businesses that draw on the waste streams from California and Washington. So we would really like to do some more research to see what our competitive advantages are, what sectors we can specialize in for that waste diversion, reuse, and match materials to those end markets as part of that analysis. In order to do this, we feel that we need legislative carrots and sticks. There has to be some penalty for not sorting, and incentives to businesses, niche businesses to build, and probably funding sources to help get them off the ground. Then we also, if we're gonna take this kind of approach, have to change our approach to franchises. And I don't know about you all for the other counties, but in Benton County's code, it's written in such a way that it really favors the large national waste hauling companies. We can change that. We can rewrite it and have competitive bidding for our hauling, which would incentivize a local separation by materials, and really lead to a system where there's hauler cost avoidance, where a hauler specializes in a particular material, for instance, and or a suite of materials, and does everything possible to avoid that landfill dump fee, a tipping fee. So, but that's a big shift in our current framework in terms of the way we approach solid waste. So, did I miss anything?
That was a big one.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. And then to this point too, so I grew up in my solid waste career in Illinois outside of Chicago. So we had franchises, but I used to say like, you literally have to murder someone to lose your franchise here in order. That's a bad joke. Don't repeat that.
It's recorded.
Like it's taken for granted, but however, I will say, the beauty of representing government is the leverage, like in the 70s and 80s, recycling systems were very new, and it took government policy pushing the haulers and collection companies to add that to the systems, and now they're the experts in it. Same thing with collecting organics and food waste compost. So there are ways to do it. If you can, you push, the companies to do it, like they're really not going to do it out of the goodness of their heart, because let's be honest, it's very cost effective for them to landfill stuff. It's a great moneymaker. Guess what's not a great moneymaker? Taking stuff to Terry for reuse. Really, like, you might break even if you're lucky, all of those things. However, what levers can we push to do that? So I think that's a really good point. Thank you. All right, so our next group here, we don't see your thing, but it looks fabulous and colorful from here. Be your man, what are you
Oh, fantastic. I'll hold this side. No, I'll take it. So we were trying to think about what we need to focus on regionally. We talked about, using the battery example, like having a regional approach to things like EPR, whatever those things will be, that there's more power in coming at it. This whole region agrees, and then, things have moved pretty quick. A really great one brought up was about regionally, within the region, the specific waste streams and processors. So the example of like, oh, you have all those mills. I wish we had those in Portland for all this lumber. We're like, well, maybe where you're hauling your waste can give you the wood to bring back. So like, we know that those are here, then why don't we bring our wood waste to that place that has the resource already, and so trying to do that, trying to leverage economies of scale. We talked a little bit about transfer station infrastructure. It's really good that we're thinking about this early, but like all those rigs can't go to Short or Coffin Butte anymore. Wherever else they go, they're not going to go there. So you need to have them going somewhere closer they can reload and have, so thinking about that infrastructure. Food policy, having a unified approach to like food waste and wasted food. We do a regional unified approach. And then talking about quantifying methodology for reuse so that we're all kind of doing that the same way. How do we measure that using the metrics that like DEQ kind of already has laid out so that we're all doing that the same? Those are some of the ones we've done about.
Yeah, thank you so much. Nice work. And if you could add your names. You could sign, give the artist names.
Yeah.
Please.
We'll let them, really can.
Purpley group over here in this corner. Paper, rock, scissors. All are very deep conceptual thinkers.
Where do the materials come in and what are the different areas that we would need to deal with each of the materials? So we talked about, upfront, you need EPR and kind of the design of the products so that they are designed with the end in mind and their journey in mind. And so we kind of started up from a beginning of the product life cycle to the end of the product life cycle. We talked a lot about how education needed to be a big part of the whole process so that people understand why and how to do the things that we would expect them to do in the system. And then we talked about, okay, so once the product is created, that maps out the life of it. So you have to have the reuse and the recycling / composting kind of infrastructure in place. And we also threw in kind of the sharing side of it, having areas where there might be opportunities for sharing of products. And we think about, I think about food waste and I think about, oh, well, I bought this giant tub of sour cream for a party and we used half of it, but then I don't need the rest of it. Where does that go? So maybe right sizing some of the, the ability to right size the products to begin with, which is something that came to mind when I was thinking about this. We also talked about, when you set up that whole system, after you have the products and you want to extend their life, so you have repair opportunities as a part of it. Landfill is obviously the absolute last place you want anything to go, but getting material, maybe methane capture and energy capture out of it. Having the partnership with community, informing, and then working with nonprofits, business and government to create the whole ecosystem, and using their different unique capabilities, like we were mentioning earlier. And then outside of that, the items that we wanted out of the system, which some of these feel like you're having a balancing act, you have affordable, but we talked about, really we need to price the externality that is what goes in the landfill, because landfill, we're storing a material for eternity. And are we pricing it correctly in that commodity and what that's actually worth, which would help move some of these other systems through correctly.
We have to keep in mind like dynamic pricing of all this, where if you've got that landfill that's brand new, yeah, it's gonna be a lot cheaper and that affordable side is gonna drive it to that landfill. But as we're experiencing now with Coffee View, that pricing is gonna change to flip the affordability to be maybe more on the repair and the reuse side versus the landfill, just as the nature of the beast.
And it has to be politically painful, which is in, direct tension with those. And then we talked about, design for life and it being comprehensive. And
that was about like location, like making it easy for people to use the system.
And knowing your location, whether you're in the city, whether you're in the county, kind of what that area is, can make a huge difference as far as how you're trying to approach that feasibility.
Thank you. Please sign your artwork as well.
But then we're centric.
That is true. It's on your some numbers. All right, last but not least, my group over here, I'd love to hear from you all. Somewhere with this. Okay.
So hold on, some big themes that came up for us as we were thinking about our ability to move the needle regarding diversion was the recognition that we have an existing system and existing facilities that could be reimagined. And we talk about transfer stations or reload facilities, which are currently trash in and trash out, and that they could be reimagined to be much more, that is where resources collect. And so we already have that system. So one of the biggest things we talked about was really understanding what we already have to work with and sort of walking our own talk with reuse and repair and working on those systems that we already have in place. Another theme that came up was local policy change and some laws and policies, for example, like anti-scavenging laws that are sort of in the way of providing convenient and accessible resources to people. We talked about access to transfer station facilities. A lot of folks don't actually have access to the resources that are there because of those anti-scavenging laws or other laws that are barriers to change. And talked about maybe at the statewide level, you know, local smaller jurisdictions sort of looking to the state or metro for help in developing those policies. And we also talked about was that I talked a little bit about making things convenient and accessible. Is there something else that bubbled up? I mean, these were like the biggest themes that I think we talked about addressing. Is that everything, you guys?
Uncommingle.
The word we made up, the uncommingling. I love it. Yeah, we talked about the importance of uncommingling or unscrambling the egg, and like if we don't commingle it in the first place, it's much easier than to distribute resources where they are needed.
Thank you. Great job, everyone. So, I find a lot of great quotes from Sean in this process, and I will say probably my most favorite thing to use is, you know, really, you know, with this meeting, what we're trying to do is just kind of have a little bit of breadcrumbs, just so you kind of are, you know, are the little squirrels coming out of the forest, just interested in what we have to say to, you know, then we're gonna give you like a whole bunch of, you know, the whole bird feeder worth of nuts and stuff. So the intention of this meeting is not to say we're defining those solutions today. I don't think I used his analogy probably. It's better when he says it, but y'all get what I'm trying to say. Like, this is your appetizer to this meal of, you know, the task force, and really, you know, really what we're trying to accomplish here is just getting your wheels, you know, spinning and turning on this, you know, like what do solutions look like? So that way, you know, when we come into the next meeting in January and subsequent meetings, that we can really start to dive into some real and concrete solutions, you know, that really make sense for our region, and knowing, you know, too, like, you know, you all might come from different, you know, differing opinions, but it's like, why can't we say that both, you know, ideas wouldn't work? You know, I think also acknowledging the knowledge base that we have in this room too, and the different perspectives that you all bring to the table, and understanding how different parts of the systems work as well. So, you know, really what we want to do is like take that, you know, kind of as a group, take that high level view and connect you all and your specialties and things like that. And I think that's really what we're hearing is, you know, how each of you just have a role to play, or like at least who you represent and how to do that. So thank you all for that activity. Yeah, so any final thoughts on that before I move us into our next discussion? Okay, well, great job, everyone. I felt bad cutting you off because there were some great conversations happening, but you'll have more opportunities. But we're going to talk about actions for a regional solution, and we're going to revisit these key questions here. Trying to do animations here, it's not cooperating. There we go. So again, what can be accomplished to develop that framework in the next 9 months to establish a regional sustainable materials management action framework? Obviously, the sentence needs to be reworked. I think it's like 2 different sentences we kind of send together, but y'all get it. Like, what do we do in the next 9 months that we're together? You know, what, you know, like, what can we accomplish something? You know, I think we can. You know, and so kind of to that point, I have some key questions. The first one is, what can this group do to address materials management challenges? And I'm going to just leave it there for discussion, give you just a few minutes to stew on this question, and then feel free to popcorn. Yeah.
Can I ask something real quick? So, in developing this, I mean, you know, Benton County kind of bringing folks together, and my understanding was like trying to create a new management plan. Is the vision that Benton County wants to create a Benton County plan, and then we all, or is this like, hey, we gotta do that, like, okay, so this is the regional led by, you know, convened by them, but we all could kind of sign off. Okay, good. Okay, wanted to make sure, because I was like, because otherwise I just have to steal it and borrow it. These are a perfect version, right? Okay.
It's gotta start somewhere, right?
I found out how you beat us, it's the mattresses.
Hey, not my fault you don't have a Terry.
I mean, do we need a leaderboard? Is this what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Amy.
Building off of Jeff's question, I guess I'm assuming that the other counties that are part of that will be invited, have been invited, will be coming to the table to be part of this?
Yes, so this is a framework. I will say too, you know, not just because I'm a consultant working with Benton County, but I think, you know, like they're really taking a leadership role, like they're seeing this problem, you know, and, you know, Coffin Butte closing is not just a Benton County problem. This is a regional problem. That's why we have this map. All these counties are going to be impacted, and I think that, you know, Benton County taking a leadership role in this is really key. Like somebody's got to be the first one to talk about it, right? So thank you, Benton County, for being those people. But if you'll notice, like they're not. This is not Benton County, you know, logoed and all of that. Like even though they're the ones who are bringing us all together, we're meeting in Salem, you know, centrally located. We're also, you know, looking at this region. So the intention is that this is the region, and sometimes all you can do is invite folks, you know, also understanding like some counties, it's like, until it's in their face, it's not a problem, you know, and so it's just too like, you know, I think from you all hearing like who's missing, you know, it's like, it's one thing to invite people to the party, but you can't bring them kicking and screaming because it's gonna be a miserable party, right? So, you know, we want everybody involved, but you know, too, like it's also about building relationships with those folks and helping them understand why this is in, and again, it's like that catastrophe, like we know the earthquake's coming, but who has a to-go or a go bag in their car? I've thought about it 11 times, but I don't have one, so we know 2037 is around the corner. But where's our plan? That's 13 years away, y'all, that's a teenager away, so that's what we really have to think about here. So that's where we are.
So is there opportunity then, I guess, as the task force to try and connect with those communities that are not here and encourage participation, or is that not kind of where we are yet?
No, absolutely, and I'm gonna let Rick and Sean really speak to this, but yeah, I mean, I think we need all of those voices at the table. We also have to have a discussion at some point, like, how do the haulers fit into this? Because the haulers are a key part of this. You know, they're part of the system. There's other groups that are part of the system. So there's bigger conversations. So you all are, you know, trusting first respondents to join us on this journey. You know, we're the folks taking this journey.
I would just say that Sean and Bailey have spoken to more people than are represented around this table. Some counties have part of an FTE that are responsible for their solid waste program, and they just don't have the capacity, but they're very interested. Some counties had never thought about what happened when Coffin Butte, heaven forbid, ends up closing, and how that's going to affect them. And I think that's part of the reason we invited Tim from AOC and Michael from the League of Oregon Cities to the table, because some of those smaller counties and cities just can't be here. But we also wanted to keep this group small enough and with the right people around the table to just generate as many ideas as possible and get this whole conversation moving. So we have that 9-month runway to get that going. And I'm hopeful that then we can take it to all of those other parties and to the legislature and reach takeoff.
I'd also like to note too, we don't want people who all have the same ideas around the table. No, we're not gonna get anything done, and we're not gonna come up with a solution. Jesse and then Terry.
It seems to me that something impactful we could do is give a menu list of options from most impactful for the region to we think this might be important, so that those who aren't at the table could certainly choose what works
Yeah.
And it would still be an impact on the region.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that, Joel and Bryce are still doing a lot more research on those things and, case studies. We had a longer list of case studies too as well, but we only have so much time, so hopefully in the future, Bryce, and then I'm gonna go to.
Can I just add on to that, when we talk about like most impactful, we should define that.
Yeah.
Right, and because it's hard to measure.
And two, like for our research folks, like the more information you can give on what you'd like to see and stuff, the better. Cause we're not mind readers, believe it or not. We can do what we think, but if there's something that you're like, oh, where's this data? Like let us know, or let Sean know to let us know. I'm gonna go with Terry and then go to Sonia.
So Liz, shouldn't we be inviting people into this, discussion, not to broaden this group out, but to invite people that have already, or organizations that are already knee deep in this problem in various sectors? So, we know that textiles is what, 2% of the waste stream. We know that textiles are going to come out of the system and get into California. It might not be in Oregon, but we'll see. And that we know that Oregon State University has done massive amounts of work on textiles and textile recycling over the last 40 years. We know that in California, they have a carpet program, a carpet stewardship program. And they've had, enough years to make every mistake, and they have, in carpet recycling in California. And I would think we should be going to those sectors inside of the waste stream where there are people that have already gone up the hill.
Yeah.
And we already know that they have this expertise and they would like to share it.
Absolutely. No, thank you. That's a very good point. We did have a OSU representative who is the textile expert who was supposed to be with us today. And she let us know this morning that she had something come up. But yes, exactly. Because especially if we know, just like in the data that we saw, like food is a major issue. Textiles, building or construction materials, like these are all huge problems. It's like, as much as I love creative reuse, that's not going to save the world. It's a really fun way to, get folks engaged in reuse, but that's not part of, the broader solution. So it's like, I think that that's a really smart approach. It's like, okay, let's tackle our biggest problem and then, kind of come up with a system that can, enhance that follows that waste hierarchy of reduce, reuse, recycle, then looking at other options like if there's, textile composting and waste. And so, I think it's looking at the materials is a very wise, strategy. Sonia.
And I was just gonna add, it's not just what is most impactful. I mean, you want the ones that are bigger in terms of how much you're keeping out of the waste stream, but also the ones that are most economically viable.
Yeah.
So you have that business aspect to be able to sell the materials and the market for them to get into the, back into reuse. Otherwise, you're not, it's great, we collected them all, we're separated out, but nobody wants to use them. Or maybe there's, ways to change policy or change, the requirements around those materials so that there creates a market for that use of them.
Yeah, and I think the market development side of things is so important, especially local ones, because I think a lot of times where, we see the issues is, not having responsible end markets. Like the built environment presentations, like what harm are we causing in other countries? Just because it's like, we feel good about recycling something or think something's being reused or something, and we are sending it away out of sight, out of mind. But it's causing harm to other communities, and that is also not a, equitable system. So, it can't just benefit us, and that's why we have to, think globally, act locally. Yes, thank you. I don't think I saw another hand and move us to the next section or question. What does a regional approach look like? Who, like Benton County's gotten this ball rolling, but is it, that our, League of Counties and League of Cities are, really bringing us all together in the conversation, like who's leading it? Is it a regional cooperative government? How do we get all our electeds involved? How do we bring it to the state level? So, there's multiple questions. I don't expect the full answer, but please, would love to just hear a discussion.
Well, I had something on the previous one, but I also can say that I think that does need to be looked at. There are many models around the country. When I retired from the city of Norfolk in Virginia, that was part of the Southeastern Public Service Authority. I'm not suggesting that's the solution here, but there's other forms of agreement or alliances that could be helpful to us long-term.
Thank you, Chair.
So I would think that the regional approach would look like every county in this region has a win out of it. And by that, I mean, whoever is, if you're in Astoria, or Tillamook County or someplace like that, you still have to move product out. And at the same time, you'd want to make sure that you're moving some product back in. You want a balanced system. And that requires that everybody has a win on this situation where they are financially and economically driven into the system rather than being just a feeder to somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. And two, I think, we're seeing, like DQ is talking about, they're starting to do funding for more localized systems. One example of like just keeping materials localized, but then also feeding back into the system, is in Seattle. There's a group called Restaurant to Garden that does, very localized recycling or composting for the Chinese American community there, and helping, they speak the language and they're working directly with Chinese speaking restaurants and gathering their food waste, but then they're working with community members to turn it into local compost locally. It doesn't have to go to a big giant facility with, a giant machine from Germany to turn it, but it just is keeping it localized. And then what they're doing is then they're giving it back to these folks to then grow food that can be served in the restaurant. So it's like, there's solutions that could be super hyper local, but then also broader scale. And it has to be a mix of those things too. All right. I'm gonna go to the next question, but I'm warning this quadrant right here that you've been awfully quiet. So I'm probably gonna look at you to respond soon. What's included in an ideal system? This could be specific, this could be high in the sky, big, hairy, audacious goal. What's included in a sustainable materials management system? And I am gonna like laser focus at this.
Well, first of all, we already voted that we were gonna cite a new landfill in Idaho.
Beautiful. So let's just go home, y'all, and go get a coffee.
But I think included in an ideal system is a lot of what we talked about before, where, we're naming that it has to be politically palatable among all of the communities, and we have in that map, you have, you have kind of the flagship conservative county as they are self-proclaimed and the flagship liberal county as they are self-proclaimed. So it's interesting to see, that variation, but also it has to be comprehensive. It has to include all types of waste. It can't conveniently just be municipal solid waste if we have some major industries in those areas. And we have to tailor a lot of the reuse to those streams, because otherwise we're starting from the wrong starting block. But,
Sonia.
I would just suggest, coming off of that conversation, that focusing on cost is a unifying thing that's not politically, I don't think it's as politically divisive. I mean, we all are going to incur these costs if we have to ship our waste to a faraway land. And so focusing on that is really unifying. And then, we get all these other side benefits of the CO2 emissions reduction and the toxics, exposure reduction. I just don't feel like we need to focus on those as much. They're important, but I think if you focus on getting the materials out of the waste stream and that's the messaging, that those other things kind of fall out of it. That's my own view. But
Thank you.
I mean, those, I think that like our, at least people at this table, if that's kind of our end goal with that. I think really like you're saying, hammer those other benefits, hit the cost side of things, the safety side of things, and then be huge to get everybody else on board.
Yeah. And I'll just note too, like, no matter your political leaning or anything, like there's always something like, or some part of the system that we can agree on, like. So
all garbage smells.
All garbage smells, right? Nobody wants it next to their house, right? But too, like, like, for example, the food rescue or the cleaner is like, okay, you're making this food available to people and it would have been put in the garbage anyway, creating methane. You know, like, I'm sure there's always somebody like a troll online or something, but, you know, like, for the most part, it's like there's systems that are already in place that it's like, okay. You know, it's serving the constituents and serving the people, and I think also always coming back to the people and how does this center people as well, I think, you know, is. You know, kind of how we find that balance too, and it's how do you find that like little crack in, you know, if somebody who's a get pro or maybe too far, you know, let's, you know. Not make a single drop of waste, you know, there's always a way to talk to folks and find those happy mediums, so. I think Amy and then, yes. Oh, Amy, yes, okay.
I was just gonna say what's, you know, you said pie in the sky, so what would be, you know, great for, in my opinion, is if we have all of the layers of the governments all matching up and clear roles and responsibilities. You know, laws that support each other, don't contradict each other or make it messy. So, you know, I don't know how to get federal government support at this level, but I mean, it sounds like we need to, you know, be having these manufacturers have more of a stake in their product. It's really hard when you, like right now at the landfill, somebody has an issue and I said, well, I don't have control over that. So you have to go to the EPA, and then the EPA says you have to go to DEQ, and then DEQ, you know, so people are running around and it's, you know, it's very challenging.
You would think it's just garbage, it's not rocket science, but there's a lot of nuance to this work, right? Like, yes.
Yeah, I was thinking kind of the same thing along those lines as far as I like the idea of hyperlocal systems that serve the local population. And I think that gets complicated when I'm in Corvallis and recycling looks different from someone who's in Eugene or Portland or Salem. And so I think the consistency and like we saw this after, you know, our recycling had to change, what was that, 6 years ago now, 8 years ago, is like, now no one knows what they can throw in the recycling bin, and I think that's a huge problem. So the consistency and then the education part has to be there for the communities. Otherwise, it's just, it won't, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, everything's contaminated, it doesn't work.
Yeah, and then just really quick, and Joel touched on it a little bit, the Recycling Modernization Act. Once that starts next July, once the dial turns, not the switch, once that law goes into place, the intention is we have a uniform statewide recycling list and that there's an education component to it. But it's like too, I think part of this group's discussion has to be, how does that complement this materials management plan? And then we have. We'll go 1, then 2, then Amy, did you raise your hand?
I mean, if we're talking ideal systems, you know, to harmonize like this USCL, how waste is collected, and also to make it easy and transparent to the end user. Like everybody around this table is very competent at separating, you know, recycling and doing all of this, and an average consumer may not be. So to make that as simple as possible will improve success. And then ultimately, this is gonna end up costing more. Like, and we have to be able to explain the benefit to people, or else it's not gonna work. So that'll be the ideal, is a harmonized system across the region and one that is transparent and educated. And some of that will be done through RMA and the Circular Action Alliance and their communication plan, but this is like one more step.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yes.
so kind of a 2-part. One, how long has Oregon been doing commingled recycling? Because I'm coming at this from growing up in the Midwest where we didn't have that, where we had, you know, several different bins, whether it's plastics, 3 different glass bins, different boards. So it was all kind of its own separate entity. And then coming here, yes, it's convenient on the user end. But how is that something that we might want to look at, like we were saying, with these waste streams, diverging it out at that end user stage? How much of a mess would that make, one way or the other? Because if it would make it easier to sort, like you're saying, now you have these different streams, and it would be a lot easier on the rest of these processes. But then where would it come to the education and the pushing it out?
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point, and I think it's clarifying, like, are we talking about like the recycling that goes into our cart, which is called single stream recycling, or these other materials too? Because to me, and then I'm gonna hand it off to Amy, you know, really like the intention of the Recycling Modernization Act is to no pun intended, continue to streamline that because we already have like facilities called material recovery facilities that have like, you know, their sorts, and then, you know, a lot of the intention is to have the funding from the Circular Action Alliance go into modernizing those facilities. So from a collection standpoint, you know, collecting it all in one, it makes a lot of sense. And especially like fiscally and stuff instead of separately. So that's the intention there, but I think there's all these other materials, like Kara was saying, like I used to run a creative reuse center and literally it looked like somebody would dump their junk drawer in. And it would take the team like 2 hours just to sort through one little box. That doesn't make sense, you know, versus recycling is kind of a different stream because there's a system in place. Amy,
I don't know why you keep calling on me. I don't.
She's like, I got something to share.
No, I'm in agreement with some of you. They're saying like, yeah, contribute. That's-
I want Amy to contribute.
I can't.
Jesse, then I'm gonna move us to our final question.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry.
it's okay.
Okay, go ahead, John, then.
So I think, a dashboard, the metrics are important of how we're moving the dial. I'm not gonna feel, I don't think anybody's gonna feel good if we have this great new system and we don't know what's happened as a result of it. So, some public facing way to show that, so we're transparent on, progress. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, I don't know if this is more about what it looks like or how we get there, but, material focused work groups. So in 3 meetings, we're not gonna be able to really address all the details related to some of the key products and materials that we need to focus on. I also think it would build ownership in the people that need to lead others to support these decisions. So industry groups that represent and that are in the mix of having to collect or produce these. So you have the manufacturers as well as, the collection groups and processing groups. You have the, analysis and, innovators, university folks, you know, all working together, all kind of communicating together about a particular material in the vein of what we're after. So there'd be liaisons from this group on that. So that's just a thought for both process, but the way products change, I'm thinking it's something that needs to be ongoing.
Thank you. I did take the material focus work group and add it to my next framing question for you all after this one. This one is a little bit rhetorical, but feel free to answer if you feel chomping at the bit, Amy, to answer. What can your organization bring to this work? You know, Sean and I were talking during the lunch break about like this wealth of expertise that we have. Like in a perfect world, we just, you know, would have gotten case studies from everyone, but you know, it's like everyone's just bringing their own expertise to the table. And so I think that there's a real opportunity here, you know, to think about like, you know, interregional solutions, you know, you know what I'm saying, the SMMP, you know, like what is your role in it, you know, as an organization, as an individual? Go with John and then, actually, I'm gonna go with Michael because we haven't heard from him yet.
Well, I wanna say to this question, and bring it back to something that Sonia said that I really appreciate. Is like, you know, a lot of our members are really facing, you know, serious financial constraints. So when I hear incentives, so I think what we bring, we bring perspective. You know, obviously the ability to like set the table in some sense and like bring our members together, but, and Commissioner, you also said, you know, carrots and sticks. That's really sort of framing like, hey, we want to solve this problem that we have coming. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, thank you. John, and then we'll go to, we've not heard from Catherine, so I'm gonna go with you. Then we'll go to John, then Jesse.
Well, I was going to offer, I work for the state legislature on environmental policy, so I was going to offer that I can, if it's helpful, I'm happy at our next meeting to provide a list of some of the policies that are already being worked on for 2025. Some of the stuff that we talked about today is already kind of on the radar of some of the legislators in the environmental caucus, so I can do that.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Now, Jackie.
I already have talked to some in the OSU community, and I think this could be done at other universities in our region. To bring students to this and academic leaders to this process. I staged one meeting at OSU and there was a lot of good interest. The other one is a little more specific to repair. I'm trying to get a assessment and inventory of repair services in the county. It could go beyond that, city or county, and matching it to some grant funding that is available. So there is an interest there, and there are 2 terms left at OSU that I think could be matched with students to various, targeted actions. And that could be research, it could be, just being represented, having good representation.
Yeah, thank you. That's kind of, I'm gonna go to Jesse, and it's kind of reminding something of Jesse was saying, kind of a small group of like, there's stuff already being done. It's like, how do we get those connections, right? Like, and I think the mapping goes a long way, but how do we continue to really see that? Like, okay, where are those synergies? Where can we see a flow of like, bringing St. Vincent de Paul and bring it together to collect their individual materials at one place, like finding those synergies, I think is really important. I'm gonna go to Jesse, then I'm gonna start to close this out.
I believe that what's included in an ideal system is some real collaboration between rural systems and urban systems. I think oftentimes the rural sector is separated out primarily because of the way that we define impact. And so we don't have as many people, maybe don't generate as much garbage, but when you take all the rural communities and put them together, it is actually a huge amount of waste. And so something that my organization, Cardum, can provide is historical knowledge and also actual system of transfer station as a reuse center and the reimagination of how we use our transfer stations. And I'm a pretty diehard proponent of the transfer station model needing to change. And what's fabulous about the fact that about the transfer station model is that it's already in place and that it already exists in both urban and rural centers, and that it is already a collection for resources. We just have to define the resources, define the waste as a resource. It's there, so.
Thank you. For real, Amy. Now
For
I'm
real,
gonna go Amy, and then I'm gonna close this out.
The Association of Oregon Recyclers, we are a trade association and our members do span the entire state, but there are a number of those counties that are part of that are not representative here at this table. And so, that's an opportunity that they're members of AOR that perhaps can do some outreach and try to bring them to the table. And, we have a lot of other resources with members who are also not here, but being able to share the experiences that come out of this on a broader scale. We also have that ability. So we're a great resource for the group and happy to do what we can.
Also, the AOR conference is June 23rd through 25th in Bend, Oregon. Amy paid me to say that.
We do have a forum next Monday.
I know Marion County had the waste energy facility and all the evidence and all those things came to our waste to energy facility, and that's gone. But one of the things that I think needs to be up there as a subcommittee is redundancy to coffin fute. Because that is a privately held landfill. And I think this group around here may have an opportunity to leverage some other options, like faster than 37 years from now.
13 years. 20.
Or whatever it is, I mean.
You're trying to give me a full middle-aged adult.
I won't be here 37 years. Oh, my dad's 92, drives Uber.
This is your homework to think about for the next hold on, we're in mid-November, 2-ish months. You can take a break for the holidays, but really thinking about like, what is this? What does the plan, what does this look like for the next 3 to 5 years? Like, if we come up with this amazing solution in the next 9 months and figure out how to enact it, like, there's gonna be some work in the next 3 to 5 years, and there's going to be some costs. So there's some real conversations that need to be had. But this was, again, just your appetizer to this wonderful meal. And so really, we talked, about next steps. Nancy, my cat, wants to know, really what are the next steps. We do have 3 other meetings on the books. The dates are still TBD, but we will get that to you by January, March, and May. And really, one thing we want to talk about is subcommittees. How do we get together? Because I heard a lot of great conversations happening when we got into small groups. There was a lot that got accomplished, right? And it's really great to come together in a big group and hear from each other, but really, like, how do we come together in smaller groups and really start to get those wheels turning and then bring those back to the bigger groups? And so far I've heard, a material for focus work group, a work group to talk about redundancy to Kickoff and Butte. Is there another type of subcommittee or work group that we need to talk about? We don't have to decide this today, but if you have the idea, I'll throw it up there.
Well, I guess but I have a question to answer that question. The question to answer the question.
Okay.
What additional work does RSC doing? Like, you kind of talked about some other like questions of research of, where do the sustainable materials management plans, like where is there overlap in those counties? Like, is that work that, are you guys planning on doing work between now and then? Is that stuff that the subcommittees would do? Like, I guess that's my question is like, what does that work plan look like for you guys?
I'll share a little and then if Sean wants to jump in. But so we currently have a project, and so a lot of what we shared today, as we mentioned, is in a draft. And we have a full deliverable coming in December. So there will be updates to the map based on things we heard today. There'll be additional research. And we envision that going into January. And we will likely be submitting an additional scope of work to sort of this conversation will be distilled into the next scope of work. So how many subcommittees do we need to support? What kind of, so I just took this list of all the things you wanted to have more information about. So those are things that we can start to bake into that next scope and things that we can do research on to bring them. But that'll be a conversation that we'll have with Bennett County after they have some time to sort of debrief on what was discussed today. So the vision is that there will be support for RS technical support and facilitation starts consultants. So this through June, but the deliverables are not yet.
So I guess one of the things that I see then, if this does not become something that is a deliverable or part of the scope of work, is for a subcommittee to work on identifying sort of, we kind of have that general map of facilities that sound like that Liz, you had put together, but maybe a broader kind of gap analysis of what is the existing facilities that are there, maybe a more complete list, but then also, what is their scope of what they do? And then really identifying kind of what's missing from the system. So like, and I think also having a better understanding of what the materials actually going into Kickoff and Butte look like. I don't know if that's an easy task to get, but I feel like it should be. They should be reporting that to DEQ. But so then identifying like what are those materials that fall outside of the RMA that will probably be most likely what we would be wanting to be managing.
I'm gonna add that under the redundancy landfill one, because that's something they'll have to think about too, what materials going in.
So you put that wherever you think it should go. Just,
I'm wondering if there's like I'm thinking needs assessment, but it's like speaking to people who are not in this room about their needs and wants and dreams. most specifically marginalized communities, rural areas, you know, places that are not places and groups that are maybe not represented in this room. So that we can get that voice, somewhere in this discussion.
Maybe if this is a reframing of what you're saying, Jesse, but maybe we need to have some sort of a communications work group or a community engagement plan.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like, I am the only one from Tillamook County. And I'm just kind of like, there are many people that I could be speaking to right now, sharing what's going on in this group, asking for what they need, like, as it applies to what we're talking about, so that I can come in with a more of a unified voice for Tillamook County. And not just speaking for the solid waste department, the reuse industry, that, you know.
Sounds like you're offering up something to bring to the table.
Yes.
Yeah. And maybe that's something that we could all think about, you know, how we can be those liaisons to those individual communities that we touch.
And that touches on the equity and accessibility. It's not, you know, because I think like the needs in a rural county are so different than the needs in, you know, Metro Portland, right? And we've got to have those discussions with people who are utilizing those services, who are providing those services. That's how we come up with an equitable system and really listening to people. I'm going to give you a quick example, and I promise I'm be done talking next year. You know, but, you know, for example, you know, Peaches and Winfield with City of Portland, you know, we, Sean and Bailey have talked to him, you know, and I remember him telling a story about, you know, how when City of Portland enacted their plastic straw ban. That sounds great. We're gonna save the turtles. We don't see those sad pictures of turtles with straws in their noses anymore. Something, they didn't even consider how this impacts people who are part of the disability community. You know, there are people who are wheelchair users who have other needs, who they need that straw to be able to have a drink, right? And that's not something that was on the radar, because they didn't think, you know, realize that a community engagement was needed to do that. So I think it's so important that as we're looking at systems, we have to make sure that community is centered throughout. We can't just be a bunch of people like, oh, I think this is great, you know, I'm gonna do this thing. We've got to center community to really have an equitable system, and long lasting. That's really what's gonna last us. But right now, I appreciate all of y'all's time. I'm going to have us close out with Commissioner Ojero. Thank you so much for having everybody here today, and I'm going to hand it off to you.
Well, first, I want to say thank you to all of the staff that made this possible, at RSS and Benton County, and all of you for showing up today, because this has been a great conversation. It's just the beginning. It was the appetizer. So we have a lot of work ahead. I heard a lot of good things. Part of what I'm hearing is wanting to have some regional consistency and to leverage the work that each other's doing and share our resources and in terms of the infrastructure and our policy approaches. But I'm also hearing that we really want to have a bottom-up approach and have localization. So that looks like taking advantage of those transfer stations and repurposing them so that we have more single stream flows of materials that are pre-sorted, so that we don't have all of that contamination that is so typical in a MRF. We want to have common metrics so that we can measure progress and know what we're doing and where we're going. We also want to make sure that every locale has a win. So I think we're thinking top down, bottom up, across the region. And we have to remember that we are not an island. So there are both materials coming from out of the region, like California or Washington or wherever. And what can we specialize? What do we have in terms of manufacturing facilities or specific expertise or knowledge where we can really build jobs, build capacity, and handle some of our waste problem, but also that for other geographies as well. Because someone has to make money, someone has to be able to be efficient in order to make this dream of reducing the waste that goes to the landfill happen. As I see it, the role of haulers is going to be critically important. We also probably have to open up competition to haulers so that we have people that can really specialize in particular waste streams, rather than have, mega haulers that take everything and bury it in the landfill. So that's going to take some political will. That's going to take some reimagining of the system. That's not an easy lift. So we have to take some baby steps and figure out what those small steps might be. what can we do locally in terms of changing our own approaches in concert ideally? And what can we do with our colleagues at the legislature to change the ground rules overall and perhaps do some more incentivization the way they have in California with a 80% diversion mandate? Is that what they have? So that is an amazing thing. That has created markets. We have to think about how we want to create markets here as well, so that we can indeed achieve our goals of reducing those materials that go into our landfills. But thank you all for all of your incredible contributions today. There's a lot of knowledge in the room. There's a ton of knowledge around the state. And we want to leverage all of that in partnership with RSS over the next few months to come up with some actionable ideas that we can move forward on. So thank you.
If you have little ones, you're welcome to take these